Good morning, everybody. Echo. We have an echo somewhere. Just check the technology. Yep, that's working now. No echo. Welcome, everybody, to the Development Management Committee of the 1st of August. A little bit of housekeeping. As the atmosphere is sort of fairly warm still, and to make us all more comfortable, I am allowing people, or asking if people do wish to take their jackets off, then they may do so. We'll remove that little bit of formality on this point. Some housekeeping for today. In case of fire alarm, please exit the doors and make your way to the far end of the car park. Toilets are outside the door on the left. Water is available outside the door on the right. Just to remind everybody, this is a public meeting. Members of the public are welcome to listen to the debate today, but unless registered as a speaker, you are not able to take part and speak. We are live webcasting today, so can I please remind members to use their microphones and remember to turn them off when speaking, and exactly the same for those who are speaking. Can I also ask everybody to please silence or switch off mobile phones so that they're not, we don't have any interruptions during the meeting. Just in terms of how items are presented today, the order for each application is as follows. The case officer, the planning officer, will present their report. Any objector will speak. Any supporter will speak. A parish council representative will speak, and ward member or members will speak. Members will be able to question each speaker on points of clarity, and can I ask members, when asking any questions, that they keep to questions and not make statements that may come up, they wish to bring up later. At the conclusion of the debate on each application, members will vote and come to a decision. I would now like to ask the officers at the top table to introduce themselves, and obviously I'll start with myself. I'm Mark Long, I'm chairman of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Amelia Bolter. I'm Senior Democratic Support Officer and Clerk to this committee. Thank you.
Good morning, Bernard Taylor, on this committee and Vice Chairman.
Good morning, everyone. I'm David Fairbairn. I'm Head of Legal Services and Monitoring Officer and the Legal Advisor to the committee this morning.
Good morning. I'm Peter Whitehead, Principal Planner.
And I'm Pat Weimer, Head of Development Management for South Lands.
Hello everyone, I'm Amanda Emerson, the Landscape Officer at South Hams District Council. I'm here for the first item on the agenda.
Thank you. Do we have any apologies today?
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Pannell, and Councillor Steele is subbing today. Thank you.
Thank you. We move to item 1 of the agenda, the minutes of the last meeting on Wednesday, the 20th of June. Do members accept that these are a true record of that meeting? Can I have a proposal and seconder? So move. Thank you, members. Item 2, urgent business. There are no items of Chair's urgent business. Item 3, division of the agenda. There is no reason to divide the agenda. Item 4, declarations of interest. Members, are there any declarations of interest? I will declare an interest in application 149824, which I will be speaking at. As it's a minor application, I will remain in the chair for that. Thank you. The list of speakers today, item 5, has been circulated to members. And before we move on to the planning applications themselves, Mr. Fairbairn would just like to raise some points with members. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairman. Given that we've got a large number of members of the public here today, and obviously there'll be people on Teams, I thought it was important just to set out the process that the committee will follow and the considerations they'll take into account when determining any planning application that comes before them. So the starting point is a statutory requirement that when making decisions on planning applications, the committee must have regard to the policies in the development plan, which in this case is the joint local plan, and any made neighbourhood plan, and to any other material consideration. A material consideration being those matters that are concerned with the use and development of land in the public interest. Anything that doesn't serve that purpose is irrelevant, and the committee will not take it into account. So not only must the committee have regard to the development plan, but any decisions are also to be made in accordance with the development plan unless those material considerations suggest otherwise. The rationale for this is that the development plan is intended to be a carefully drafted and considered statement of policy published to inform the approach that will be followed by the committee in decision making unless there's good reason to depart from it. So the development plan policy, development plan itself has a number of policies. In some cases they will support development, in other cases they will be against the development proposals. And in that case, the members of the committee will adopt, will need to balance the conflicting policies, and it's a matter of their planning judgment as to which policy should be outweigh the other. And finally, when interpreting development plan policies, members will read those policies sensibly, and the words that are used will have their ordinary and natural meaning and are not the meaning that the committee would like to ascribe to that particular policy. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Fairbairn. We'll now move on to agenda item 6, the planning applications, and the first one today, 6A, is 149723 FUL, Bigbury Golf Course, and the case officer is Peter Whitehead. Mr. Whitehead, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. This is an application for the installation of a ground solar array at Bigbury Golf Club. Right, so this is the application site. I'll explain more about the application as we go on, but you'll see the application site has a long, thin track running down off the public highway, and then a rectangular area of land on which the solar array is proposed. Clubhouse, as you can see, is to the west, and the arrows indicate the means of attaching the solar array to the clubhouse with cables. This shows the wider context of the site. The application site and the golf club is all owned by the Bantham estate, and the golf club rent the land from the estate. The application site itself is part of a field which has a southerly slope. It's an elevated site, as we saw on the site visit earlier in the week, and the solar array is almost on the skyline. And as we saw earlier in the week as well, the solar array would be prominent in short and long range views from the south and southeast. And the entire site is within the national landscape and also the undeveloped coast. This shows the application, the development in more detail. As we saw at the site visit, what are proposed are effectively 4 freestanding solar arrays. Each one would be 10.3 metres in length. Overall length of the development is about 43 metres. The solar arrays are going to be located, as you can see here, relatively close to an existing hedge, and will be viewed against the backdrop of that hedge. There's also an area of land to the north, which you'll see identified there. As we saw at the site visit, that is currently ornamental shrubs and such. And the application proposes that this be re-landscaped with additional trees to provide a bit of a landscape buffer and a backdrop to the solar arrays when viewed from the north, or indeed from the south. As I said, the site is a sloping parcel of land, slopes to the south towards us, but also slopes, as you can see, to the east. So therefore, all 4 of the solar arrays would effectively step down the hill. Because of that, there are varying in heights. At their lowest height, they will be 2.167 metres above ground, and at their highest height, as in downslope to the right-hand side of this slide, they will raise to 2.817 metres above ground. Overall, application proposes 72 panels, each of which will be 450 watts. By my mathematics, the generating capacity of the array is therefore around about 32 kilowatts max. This is a cross-section through, so you get an idea of context. There's a stock-proof fence proposed on the south side of the fence that will provide a buffer between the solar array and the rest of the field, which, as we saw, is in agricultural use, and as I say, owned by the Bantham estate. You can see here as well the existing hedge. The intention is that the existing hedge be maintained at a height of 3 metres or 3.5 metres. And then you can see here again, looking from the opposite direction, the proposal to provide additional tree screening to the north side of the hedge. That would need to be subject to a landscaping scheme were the application to be approved. We've had dialogue with the applicants regarding the siting of the array. You'll see from the officer's report concerns from us about its location and impact upon the national landscape. We've had discussions regarding the choice of site, and the applicants have effectively explained that they have no other sites within a 100-metre radius that they could offer or would be preferable. 100 metres, as I understand it, being the limit of the cable to attach the solar array to the clubhouse. As I will explain in a minute, the intention is that the solar array provides energy for the club, so it needs to be connected to the clubhouse and its energy supply. As I understand it, if it's further away than 100 metres, they'd need a different cable calibre, and that would make the development unviable in their view. They have looked at other options. They've looked at various sites within the golf course, which have been ruled out logically perhaps because of flying golf balls that would damage the apparatus. They've also looked at the car park, which would have a similar, if not greater, visual impact perhaps from the road. And there are also issues relating, as I understand it, to a siting of an emergency landing ground for the air ambulance, which again rules out part of the site. So this is why they've arrived at the site in front of us today. So, as was noted in the report, the site is a sensitive one. It's in the national landscape and it's also in the undeveloped coast. Application has therefore been supported by a landscape and visual impact assessment, and this is the zone of theoretical visibility which has been supplied, which indicates areas within the landscape where the site could theoretically be viewed from. We have a number of vantage points which have been identified here, which have helped us to understand the level of visual impact of the array in the landscape. And as per the site visit and discussions there, we have identified a number of points both within reasonable distance of the array and also close to within the Bigbury Golf Club itself, where we feel the array would have a harmful impact. And you will have noted from the concerns of the landscape officer regarding the introduction of what is an uncharacteristic industrial form of development in a prominent exposed countryside location in the landscape. These are the views close to. There are, as I noted on site, 2 footpaths. We walked along them. One is the footpath immediately to the west of the application site itself. The highway that runs south, or the track that runs south, serves the farm, but it's also a public footpath, Bigbury Footpath 6. If you can pick up points A, B and C, they are all within Bigbury Footpath 6. And then there is another footpath which runs almost horizontally, east to west, which is Bigbury Footpath 17. and we walked down there and viewed the site from that point earlier in the week. So this is some distance away. This is from Thurleston, a couple of kilometres from the site, but it picks up the fact that this is a prominent site on the skyline. You can see from this slide, which has been supplied as part of the visual impact assessment, the fact that the clubhouse is visible even from this distance on the skyline, and the proposed panels would also be identifiable on the skyline. Similar vantage point from a similar distance. Again, this is from the golf club, Thurleston Golf Club, public right-of-way that crosses the course. This is closer to from one of the farms, Bantham Estate Farm, again, public right-of-way. And here we are closer to, this is pretty much where we stood earlier in the week at the junction of footpaths 6 and 17. And again, you can see that the array would be visible against the backdrop of the hedge here, pretty much on the skyline. Similar vantage point on that footpath. And this is walking up Bigbury footpath 6. The array would be against the hedge you can see on the skyline there. And this is looking across from the gate into the field in question. So the key issues really in this case are set out there. We've weighed the two, the visual impact upon the scenic beauty of the natural landscape and the benefits of providing renewable energy. Just to summarise then, so the site lies in a national landscape, a valued landscape requiring the highest degree of protection. The NPPF reminds us of the great weight that should be given to conserving and enhancing the landscape and scenic beauty of such areas. And our own policies in the JLP follow suit, DEV 23 and DEV 25, and indeed BP 18 of the local neighbourhood plan as well, which echo the NPPF. The site is also located in the undeveloped coast, and DEV 24 similarly seeks to resist development that would have a detrimental impact on an area's character and seeks to maintain the special qualities of an area. It's important to note that policy does not seek to resist solar arrays in protected landscapes. Both the AO&B management plan and our own policies specifically allow for small-scale proposals, but they guide development to appropriate locations. We have approved such proposals in discrete locations, in a dip in the landscape, for example, where they do not impact upon public views and people's wider enjoyment of the countryside, and where they respect scenic quality, scenic beauty. And that really is the issue here. It's the location of the array that is problematic to us as officers, given the exposed and prominent slope on which the site is, the array is located close to the skyline. With regard to the benefits of the proposal, and it is a planning balance here, of course, it's acknowledged that the proposal will meet nearly half the energy demands of the club that are currently met by fossil fuel use. The NPPF and our own policies, SPT1 and DEV 32, clearly support a move towards a low carbon economy, with DEV 32 supporting a plan area target to halve 2005 levels of carbon emissions by 2034. We've also declared, of course, a climate emergency, and in recognition of the importance of using the planning system to aid in tackling climate change, have adopted a climate emergency planning statement, one of the objectives of which is increasing renewable energy generation and reducing reliance on fossil fuels. However, it is acknowledged that these policies, while supporting renewable energy generation, equally seek to ensure that any landscape impact can be made acceptable. And in this case, we have considered the level of impact caused by the development and the inability to appropriately mitigate and compensate for this. And having carefully weighed these issues, are of the view that the impact of the development upon the national landscape and undeveloped coast outweighs the important but nonetheless more moderate benefits of the proposal in securing low carbon development and the other benefits identified, biodiversity enhancement being the key one here. On balance, therefore, the development is considered to be contrary to the policies cited, and a recommendation of refusal is thus made. Just have a couple of late reps. You'll note from the report that there was a representation made from the RSPB, They have now viewed the follow-up drawings, the more detailed drawings that were subject to more recent consultation, and have confirmed they have no objection. I also have a further an email from Bigbury PC who've confirmed that they still support the application as per their earlier response. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Members, any questions on the report? Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter, for a very comprehensive report. And it was very interesting to go to the site meeting on Monday. It's a couple of questions really about what questions about mitigation have been considered, because it seems that visual mitigation potentially is the location that's the issue. So there's a stop-proof fencing going in front of, proposed to go in front of these panels. Has there been any conversation about whether or not that could actually be accompanied by a new hedgerow being installed there, which could be managed at, say, 2 to 3 metres, which still would not stop the solar impact on the panels, but would actually potentially distort the view of that straight black line across the landscape?
We have discussed various options with the applicants. I've inherited this application from another officer who's now left, so he had quite a lot of discussions, I believe, with the applicants and the applicants in turn with the Bantham Estate. But bear in mind the application site is the land outlined in red, and the entire site and surrounding land is outside the applicant's ownership. So any land outside the red line would not be able to be conditioned. It would need to be subject to a legal agreement if you were sort of mindful to try and secure landscaping. I have nothing on the table to say that that's acceptable to the Bantham Estate, but it would have to be subject to a legal agreement, as I say, because they're not the applicant, and the applicants are not the landowners. We have discussed with, though, the applicants moving the array further down the field, which would take it off the skyline. And my understanding, and by all means ask the applicants, they are here to speak, my understanding is that that option was not acceptable to the estate because it would reduce the agricultural potential of the field. This, where the application is cited, is a field margin, which I suspect is of less value to them. And the other question, I suppose, is whether any screening to the south side of the array would impact upon its performance. It would have to be relatively tall screening, given that the site is on a slope itself. Our preference, and Amanda, obviously our landscape officer, is here to speak in terms of mitigation, would be to look at a different siting altogether, a site that is more discrete in the landscape and therefore would benefit from screening by topography rather than relying upon planted screening that takes time to mature and it's cannot be guaranteed that it'll be there in perpetuity.
If I can just come back, and has other consideration maybe, when you look at the actual landscape across, I mean, unfortunately we haven't had a slide that shows the solar panels, a Photoshop of the panels in situ in the where the building is next to it as well, because they're all fairly close together. Because is there been any conversation about some kind of mitigation to reduce the look of the building itself? I mean, some trees around that would perhaps soften the overall which potentially with this could be enlarged. Whether there's an overall sort of mitigation sort of proposal that could actually make the whole thing look slightly different, but a lot softer in the landscape, being as it's on the ridge. Has that been discussed?
We haven't discussed anything beyond the mitigation of the array itself. No.
Thank you. It's fine.
Yeah, there is. I mean, I think the applicants will be providing a photograph or a picture which shows the array in situ. I would just a word of caution there. It is a photo montage. It's not necessarily accurate, but it will show you the array in. It's photoshopped. Yes, it will show it in context. But Amanda will be able to sort of comment more broadly about that.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Councillor Bonham.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Peter, for your report, which I think explains the issues very clearly. And just to follow up from the previous question, I wonder if you think there's an alternative site, maybe further down that hill, that would mitigate the landscape issues and concerns, but also be within the 100-metre requirement for the cable that we understand is a kind of constraining factor or whether there's any other position. For example, whether a solar panel on a car park roof would be an option that would be preferable. I don't know where the air ambulance site is particularly, but you know, I'm just interested to know if you think there's better proposals for this for the location that would be more acceptable. Thank you.
I'll answer that in part, but then if I may defer to Amanda to consider more broadly. We obviously have an application for the 72 panels in the array that's proposed in front of us, and my understanding is that the viability issue relates to the development as it stands. We have looked at other options, and as you saw at the site visit, the land does fall to the south, and there may be locations within the wider site that are more discrete. We haven't investigated those in detail, but there have been discussions about finding a more appropriate site. The application has not been subject to a pre-app, so that would be the vehicle to sort of discuss different options, and it's open to discussion whether a slightly larger array would be more viable, but further from the golf club. If having a slightly larger but more discreetly sited array would make a more practical solution. But as I say, we haven't had these discussions with the applicants. They're not the landowners, as we've seen, and we don't really know what land is available, but there may be more discrete sites further than 100 metres from the site, but we would need to undertake that as a part of a pre-app discussion, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. There are obviously questions here that may be more appropriate for the applicant, but also to remind everybody that we have the application before us. Obviously, the issue is that's been raised is the visual impact. So I think to sort of tweak that out and draw that out, I will ask Amanda Emerson if she will just give some views on the landscape aspect for members while they're listening to the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the application was accompanied in the documents that were submitted with a list of alternative locations that the applicants had considered that were within their 100-metre radius of the clubhouse, so that their connection and their cabling would all work effectively. Of those, one was the air ambulance landing site, discounted. One was the car park location, which would arguably have larger visual effects, harmful visual effects. The operational needs or the playing needs of the layout of the golf course limit certain other locations. They considered the north side of the hedgerow, which potentially would be less harmful from a visual impact point of view, because of vegetation beyond that to the north and because of the positioning of the way that the panels would face. But from the club's point of view, that was not a preferable location because of the risk of damage to the panels from golf balls. There was consideration, a suggestion during the process of discussing this about moving the panels further south on the field slope, but it rapidly becomes further away from the 100-metre radius. And as Peter has explained, there is the ownership issue that the golf club would need to negotiate with the landowner. And they quite rightly suggested that that might actually make the panels just as visible and potentially as harmful for users of the public rights of way. So there are constraints. There are significant constraints because of the nature of the cabling that they need to use and the distance from the clubhouse.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Thank you. I'm just interested in the RSPB's initial concerns about the site around the civi bunting, which are breeding on the fields, which is great to hear. Do you know what it is about the reason that they dropped their objection or they dropped their concern? What did they find out? Is this something that you?
I'll take this one. Yeah, the RSPB. They were initially interested in whether the development would have any impact upon hedgerows and sort of the in effect, because that's the habitat, isn't it? As you know. So they sort of had a sort of a holding objection, or not a holding objection, but they wanted more information. It was clear from what was proposed that the development would not impact upon the hedgerow anyway. I think their concern was it might involve removal or damage to the hedge, but it clearly doesn't. The intention is the alternative. It's actually reinforcing the hedgerow and planting more landscaping. So I think once they understood the proposals as a whole, they were happy with the level of detail that's been provided, and as I say, have now removed any objection.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Councillor Bonham.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I want to pick up, if I may, on the point made earlier about conditions, and I want to understand, does the committee have the option of making a condition which is effectively asking for a legal agreement between the golf club and the landowner, maybe for a hedgerow, as suggested by my fellow councillor, or a hedgerow strengthening along the footpath, I think footpath 7, which 6, I should say, along the side of this proposed installation, or are we not allowed to do that? Thank you.
The authority can't put a condition on a planning application to say it has a condition saying you must make a legal agreement. What the authority can do is approve an application subject to a legal agreement setting out whatever it is you want to do. The reason why it would need to be a legal agreement is that the hedgerows you're referring to are outside of the red site area, hence it can't be a condition. If members were minded to do that, I potentially suggest there ought to be some form of discussions with the applicant first to see if that's even practicable, given that they're not the landowners.
Thank you, Mr. Weimer. Councillor Steele.
Thank you. Maybe a question for yourself or the applicant. So going back to the north side of the hedge that you looked at, and that it's exposed to golf balls. But in the mitigations, there was a plan to plant trees where the ornamental garden is. Was that looked at in terms of the trees providing enough screening from golf balls? Because the trees are proposed anyway as a mitigation, but it looked at as being strong enough to protect from golf balls.
Yeah, thank you. Possibly that question might also be answered by the applicant, but my understanding is that the additional tree planting, the intention is to provide a stronger, darker, softer backdrop to the panel. The reason that I sustained an objection to the application is because I don't believe that they've been able to offer effective mitigation for the visual harm that the panels will have because of the location and how prominent it is. There is a benefit to having a stronger, darker, natural backdrop to the panels, but it won't screen them. It may well stop the golf balls getting at them, which would be a definite benefit.
Thank you.
Councillor Rake.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your report, Peter. I just, and again, perhaps this is a question better asked to the applicant, but one of your early diagrams showed it as AC cabling from the panels, which means that the inverter stage of the whole process would have to happen at the panels, but there's nothing on the plans. Just can you confirm that there's nothing on the plans to show inverter housing or similar there?
There is nothing shown. I mean, an inverter for a sort of domestic scale apparatus like this would be relatively modest, as you all know. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you. I just want to clarify a point about the glare from the solar panels. So you mentioned at the site visit that they will be in dark glass, but the support will be metal. Is there any way that we can put into condition the type of materials that are used or the colours that are used? Because I can see that with the dark background, if we had dark material on the solar panels, that they will be less obvious. Thank you.
I'll take that if I may, and then pass briefly on to Amanda. I mean, we can impose a planning condition that the frames themselves are painted a dark colour. As you will have noted from the officer's report, the panels themselves are designed to be, what's the word, non-reflective. Amanda has picked up in her response, though, that even if there is limited or relatively modest or non-existent glinting glare, the fact that they are a panel does mean that they will reflect the sky. So they may be dark in certain conditions, but they may also be white, or they will change with the sort of the sky which they reflect. So they will be notable in the landscape. They will be an unusual feature in the wider landscape. But yeah, thank you.
Actually, I'm not sure I've got very much to add to that, to be fair.
Sorry.
The likely visibility may well change during the course of the day, the weather conditions, the time of year, all of those things. But we all know when we see solar panels that there are instances, depending on where you're viewing them from, that they pick up the reflection of the sky, no matter how non-reflective the surfaces are. I've no doubt that the applicants have come up with a panel, framework and system that is as non-reflective as they can. The black frames, they'll be not like some of the ones that we see, the older panels where you've got white frames around them and they really stand out. These are quite dark. But as Peter's said, we're talking about a site that's in an agricultural landscape. Yes, it's next to the golf course, but it's not actually part of the golf course. So it's a further form of development that you wouldn't normally expect to see in a rural agricultural field. And that is the problem.
Thank you. Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you. Just a quick comment. I can't see any mention of it, so I'm just wondering, is there a Big Bree neighbourhood plan? Does that have a policy for this?
There is a Big Bree neighbourhood plan, and yes, it is referred to in the officer's report. There is a policy, I think it's BP 18, if I remember rightly, that refers to small-scale renewables, and is pretty much consistent with our own councillor in offering support, but it is pivotal on the development not impacting harmfully upon the national landscape and so on. So it's pretty consistent with our own policies. But yes, it is in the report. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions of the officer's report? Councillor Oram.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick one on the report. I see that there were 7 letters of representation to support the application. One that was undecided, but we've cleared that up now. I can't see any objections on this report.
There are no letters of objection on this application. Thanks.
Councillors, any further questions? If not, I'll draw that section to a close and move on to the first of the speakers, Mr. Bastone. If you'd like to come forward, please, and you have your 3 minutes. Mr. Bastone, when you're ready, we'll start your 3 minutes. And remember to switch your mic on. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Joe Bastone from Big Bree Golf Club. According to your own planning guidance for solar arrays requiring planning permission, our array at 144 square meters is deemed very small. Dev 23 states that development will avoid significant and adverse landscape or visual impacts. Our array would not create a significant or adverse impact. Slide 1, please. The array has been described as permanent and industrial. It's neither been fully reversible and hardly discernible. It will be seen as part of the golf club complex and being sited on a field margin will blend in with the hedge behind as demonstrated in this slide. The array would be broken into 4-step sections to follow the contours of the land. Slide 2, please. Visibility of the array would be limited. The yellow line measuring 0.4 miles represents the public rights of way and the access road from which the array could be seen. Today, without our proposed mitigation, the array would not be seen at all for 40% of this distance because of landform or vegetation. With mitigation, this figure could be increased to 51%, leaving under 0.2 miles of either partial or full visibility. The landscape officer is concerned that the greatest harm will be experienced by users of the road and nearby footpaths. This application has been live for over 14 months, been advertised twice, yet not one resident living off this private road has objected. No one has. Walkers are advised by notices that they are travelling through a golf course. It's a dangerous path to walk. Care needs to be taken to avoid injury from golf balls and greenkeepers driving heavy machinery. This is a climate emergency and you signed up for it. This array will save 8.3 tonnes of carbon each year, save up to 66% of our annual electricity cost, reduce our running costs and so help maintain job security for 19 staff, and a sports facility widely acknowledged as beneficial to people's physical and mental health. Reducing carbon emissions helps maintain a stable climate, which the AONB needs to maintain its beauty. If vegetation gets washed away by floods or scorched by droughts, it is no longer beautiful. This array would not alter any landforms, and the anti-reflection coating would negate glint and glare concerns. The proposed planting would deliver biodiversity gain, so enhancing the AONB. The NPPF states that the local planning authorities should approve applications for renewable or lower carbon development.
Mr. Bastone, we're sort of at
if
the
its
end of your
impacts
3
are
minutes.
or can be made acceptable. We think proposed mitigation delivers on this.
Thank you, Mr. Bastone.
Let's work together.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you, and yeah, thank you for allowing us to view it on Monday. That's very appreciated. I think it really helped. So I just wanted to ask you the question that I asked to the officer at the beginning of this session, in terms of the stop-proof fencing that's going to be put in front of the panels. I'm just wondering if this, I mean, it doesn't have to be a fully fledged hedgerow, but it could be some kind of planting along there that would just break up that line between what will be the black of the panels and potentially the green of the grass if the animals are grazing it. And just the stop-proof fencing doesn't really offer any sort of visual. But I just wonder if there's some kind of planting that could be considered along there.
We are.
I know you've got restraints because of who the landowner is, but if it was within your red line.
Yeah, it's within the fenced-off area, if you like. We are going to be planting natural wildlife, plants, and allow it to grow. Obviously, not of the panels. So there is a limit, obviously, because you can't block the sunlight to the panels. So we are intending to make it more.
If I may just come back, what I'm thinking of is something that kind of just is a bit more like that just would break up that line. That's all. I just wonder. It's just a thought, anyway.
Well, one of the mitigations we've done as well, at the end of the panels from the gateway, we have said that we would put a hedge, so when you walk past the gateway, you don't see the panels. Yeah, and also as you walk down the pathway, we offered to put some more higher hedging or trees down along the road. So when you walk up the road, you can't see the panels. So we've actually offered quite a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Bastow. Councillor Bonham.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering, some of the things on this application confuse me a little bit, so forgive some of these questions, but what's the main rationale for you doing this? Is it, presumably it's a financial saving, is it over a period of years? Is that the driver primarily for you, or I hope you don't mind me asking what the main reason is that we're going down this route?
I could go through a whole list of things that we're doing at the golf club for sustainability and the environment. If you've got time, I can list those. We're a very sustainable club, and this is one of the things with regard to climate change we're trying to do is reduce our costs, reduce fossil fuel use and obviously help our finances, because we aren't, we're all, our income comes from just golf. We're not sponsored or anything like that. So it is money saving, obviously, saving the cost of our electricity, and for the environment.
Thank you, Mr. Bastow. Councillor Bonham.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that totally makes sense. I just want to make sure we understand the point that you've got in the slide, if I may, which is the extra mitigation. I think you mentioned it briefly already. That is this to do with the trees that you're proposing to put up on the side of footpath number, I got it wrong before, number 6, I think. Is this reducing the impact from, or the visibility from another 10% or so, or because I'm
Yes.
not sure we really saw that in the plans, to be honest, and that's why this is a little bit
The
unclear.
increase to go to 51% is actually adding those trees on the end of the array, and also along the vertical sort of road part, if you like. We've asked for from the council, what else do you suggest we can do? I mean, we've offered lots of things that we can do. If there's more we can do.
Thank you, Mr. Bastow.
Do you think then, sorry, Chair, if I may, do you think then the idea of a more substantial hedgerow on the southern side of this array, obviously at a distance so that it doesn't reduce the sunlight, but at a height that maybe mitigates some of the visual impact from further away, do you think that's possible from your point of view and from the landowner's point of view?
Not from the landowner's point of view, because the field is used for agricultural use, and also there's a pheasant shoot, so we can't really upset that, and the landlord wouldn't accept that.
Councillor Bonham, that point did come up, and as it's outside the red line, it would need a legal agreement with the landowner. So that point already came up. Thank you. We have Councillor Rake.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Mr. Bastow. So we've been told that this is a balance of harms and benefits. Can we just dig down a little into the benefits? You're not proposing that this be grid connected, as far as I understand.
No.
Okay.
There is a possibility if we don't use all the electricity, there is a possibility, as with a domestic use, you can actually feed back into the grid, but it's a low return, so it's an outside possibility. In the future, when we can afford it, if this gets accepted, we may put a battery system in. So any excess goes into the batteries, and then we use it from there. We can charge the buggies and all sorts of things.
For sure. I mean, you might not have this figure available, but roughly what's your electricity consumption at the moment?
It's about 6,000 kilowatts a month, I guess.
Okay. And have you taken other energy efficiency and mitigation measures in the clubhouse? I mean, is this part of a suite of things that you're doing to help the climate?
Yes, I mean, we're looking at, we've got an oil-fired heating system at the moment, which is obviously fossil fuel. We're looking to, with the solar, we're looking at to see if we can actually take that away and improve the system. We're also looking at EV chargers. This would help and give us a return as well.
Obviously, I have some experience in this. I have an array of almost identical size to yours, or to your proposed one, and the output is highly seasonal. Is your use very seasonal?
We obviously the golf course is not so busy in the winter. Three months of the winter, maybe 4, depending on if we had like last winter. Not many people play golf in the rain, so the use of electricity goes down quite a bit. I mean, we've got a restaurant, kitchen, etc., so that uses quite a lot of electricity. Our peak use is about 28 kilowatts per hour. So it's in the summertime, so it's quite high use.
So in the summertime, on the figures we've heard, that the panels would cover it all, roughly. They should kick out around that. Yeah. Okay. And lastly, just the question I asked Mr. Whitehead. It's an AC cable run from the panels to the clubhouse. So will there be some? I mean, I accept that they'll be small, but there's some inverters on the panels, as far as you're aware.
An inverter next to the panels.
Okay.
With the panels.
Thank you.
And then obviously the cable, AC cable goes across.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott.
Thank you. Just a question on the hedge behind. It's good that the hedge is being protected and preserving the habitat there. Has the hedge reached its maximum growth? Because otherwise, will you have access to trim behind the panels?
We have 6 greenkeepers that look after the golf course, and that will be part of their maintenance work to maintain and look after that hedge.
Yes, I'm sorry. So there is sufficient room between the panels and the hedge to get in there. Thank you.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you. Just thinking ahead. So in terms of looking towards a sort of sustainable future, I think potentially the issue of this is the block industrial nature of these panels in a row. So if you were looking ahead, are you planning to create more solar panels? You talked about EV charging. Are you going to have EV charging your car park, which might mean solar panels over the car park, which seems to be the most efficient? Is this part of a bigger picture, or are you hopefully or sort of potentially stopping there? If you haven't been put off so far.
Councillor Allen, we're looking, I know you're trying to sort of tease bits out, but we are looking at the current application.
We have got lots of plans for the future, and it could be that we look at more panels, but the time it takes to get approval or not approval, then we have to really think about what else we can do, and it's not difficult because this is the easiest way. I mean, maybe a turbine, but that would be worse, perhaps.
Councillor Steele.
So going back to the question I asked the landscape officer. So we know it's difficult to build another hedge to the south because of the landlord requirements. So can you talk a bit about why it's not feasible to put them on the north side of the existing hedge? Maybe put something else behind it, be it trees or another hedge or a fence to stop golf balls.
Sorry, can you just repeat that last bit?
So can you talk a bit about why it's not feasible to put the arrays on the uphill side of the existing hedge So we've got the ornamental garden part, which could be put in another hedge or another fencing to protect from golf balls. So do you have the?
Could I come in on that? I think he's asking where the pheasant feed is at the bottom of that paddock, because he got an area there and he feeds pheasants. Yeah, so you're looking at that bit, I think. Because
it's further up. So where we've got the slide here. So we have the proposed site for the arrays, the existing hedge, the proposed tree mitigation. So between the existing hedge and the proposed tree mitigation, can you talk about why that's not?
Sorry, the gap between the hedge and those circles.
That's right. Yes.
There's a 10th green just behind those trees and the fairway, and there's a big risk that if we put the solar panels there, golf balls would land on the panels. So it's quite a risk. You can purchase netting that you can fit around it, but then you've got small netting, so it reduces the capture of the sun. So it's a risk, and it could cost us quite a bit of money on a regular basis for new panels. So that's why we came away from that one, really.
Okay. Additional question. I know in the report it says the roof isn't practical. Have you looked at costs of how? Would it be cheaper to strengthen the roofs and build all the cables?
The roof is the obvious one. A lovely flat roof. It's felted. It's been there for over 15 years, and obviously there's a lot of maintenance coming up or to be done to that roof on a long-term basis. Once you put the panels on the roof, then you have to remove them to repair it, to replace it, etc. We do not know what is the roof. The roof's made up from a structure point of view, and it would cost a fair bit of money for us to really look into it and go along that way. We could put a lot more on the roof. We could put 200 panels on the roof, but from a risk point of view, we thought it was too risky.
Thank you, Mr. Bastone. Councillors, any other questions? If not, thank you, Mr. Bastone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next, as members will be aware, the government has made some announcements about changes, and there's a consultation document out that came out yesterday on the MPPF, and we think it's relevant to make members aware of what the consultation and what the government is proposing in this direction to consider. So, Mr. Fairbairn?
Yep. Thank you, Chairman. The consultation draft of the MPPF does reflect the government's stated policies about improving or increasing measures to protect the climate. And in revisions to paragraphs 163 and 164 of the MPPF, it is proposing that local authorities, when determining planning application, should also give significant weight to support energy efficiency and low carbon heating improvements to existing buildings, both domestic and non-domestic, and that includes heat pumps and solar panels where these are not already benefiting from permitted development rights. But the revision to 164 talks about local authorities should support planning applications for all forms of renewable and low carbon development. Members will be aware that there'd been a much heralded announcement in respect of onshore wind farms, but the consultation draft of the NPPF is making it clear that it applies to all forms of renewables. What hasn't happened is there has not been any change to the paragraph 182 dealing with the impact of development on national landscapes, which is still requiring you to give great weight. So you have got a potential tension, but for the moment, the tension is in terms of the revised NPPF is slightly less because it's at a consultation stage. So, but you've got that. You need to be aware.
Just can I just add that, not helpfully in my opinion, the new elements around renewables specifically says local planning authorities should also apply the policies set out in Chapter 16. And Chapter 16 is about the national landscape. So on the one hand, it's saying you should give significant rate to support. On the other hand, it's saying you should give great weight to protect the national landscape. So I can see tensions there. But as Mr. Fairbairn said, this is a consultation draft. So we'll see what happens when at the end of the consultation period.
I knew that was going to generate some questions. Councillor Bonham came in first, and then Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I have to admit to being confused because I thought we're supposed to be following the agreed NPPF and local plan, not a consultation draft. So do we place any weight on this consultation draft? And if so, why would we do that? I'm sorry to ask that. Thank you,
Chairman. Because it's now in the forum. It is a material consideration because it's government. It's got a statement of government intention. It's ministerial intention with regard to planning policy. That is a relevant consideration, but it's one that we would suggest that you give little or limited weight to in terms of the balancing exercise at this particular point in time. Clearly, once we get the consultation responses in, and then you get the government response to that, then it gets weight. It's a bit like, but it is a material consideration to go in the basket, if I can put it that way.
Councillor Hodgson.
I was only going to comment that when all the biodiversity net gain discussions and consultations were going on, I would have just loved that to have been read out at a committee meeting.
Agreed, Councillor Hodgson. Thank you. We'll now move on to the next speaker, Councillor Wainwright from Bigbury Parish Council. Your 3 minutes will start as soon as you sit down and switch on the microphone. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I've got 5 points to make. The first one is more of a background. Bigbury Parish Council declared a climate emergency in October 2022 and they established a climate and biodiversity action policy, and that included saving energy, producing more green energy and reducing environmental harmful emissions. This proposal that we are supporting fits nicely into our climate and biodiversity policy. Point number 2. Bigbury Parish Council has debated this proposal twice, both in 2023 and 2024. And as part of this debate, our Neighbourhood Planning Committee, which is a subcommittee of the Parish Council, reports to us as the Parish Council. And both the Neighbourhood Planning Committee had no objection to this proposal, and the Parish Council unanimously supported this proposal on both occasions. Point number 3, it's already been mentioned that there have been no objections to this planning proposal. Point number 4, is this setting a precedent for setting up ground-based solar panels within the parish? I would like to remind councillors that there are 96 ground-based solar panels on Burr Island, and they are viewed by hundreds of people every day, especially in this summer. And finally, my final point is that the South Devon National Landscape has a position statement on renewables, and they are advocating, and I'm going to quote to you their position statement. They advocate the development of small, sensitively sited renewable energy installations where the impacts are local in scale, provide a demonstrable net environmental gain, and where the energy is used close to the site of the generation installations. These will operate at an individual farm, household, or community scale, have minimal transport or transmission impacts, and be unobtrusive in the landscape. Now, I appreciate the interpretation of unobtrusive in the landscape is open to debate, but in conclusion, this proposal has the Parish Council's full support, and I recommend it to the Council.
Thank you, Councillor Wainwright. Thank you. And for keeping within your 3 minutes. So appreciate that. Councillors, any questions of Councillor Wainwright? Councillor Taylor.
Councillor Wainwright, where does this sit within the neighbourhood plan? Because honestly, I didn't get a chance to look at it yesterday because I got a copy of the neighbourhood plan. Does this supported by the neighbourhood plan, or is it something that they don't support? How would this sit in with that neighbourhood plan?
There's clearly a statement on protecting the environment and within the neighbourhood plan. I can't quote you the paragraph number, but in principle it's supported by the neighbourhood plan. And there are, and solar panels are allowed as long as they meet certain criteria, and it's BP 12 or 18 or whatever it is. It's a matter of interpretation of that, and I think the Neighbourhood Planning Committee interpreted that this was an acceptable provision as opposed to an unacceptable provision.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Wainwright. No other questions? Thank you, Councillor. We now move on to the ward member, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you very much. Most of what I've brought this forward for has been discussed already, but I thought that it was prudent that the committee decided this one because we got two elements. One is that the Follaton District Council has called for a climate emergency some 3-4 years ago. So this is something we need to take into account. We also got, we've got to look at how we protect the national landscape and the heritage coast. So I thought it probably better coming to committee to decide this one because we've all had a look, brilliant. The screening behind the panels, I'm sure that Councillor Baston would never break one of those panels because he doesn't, he's both crooked anyway. But that is something that would actually break it up from the rear, but not from the front. But I wanted to bring it to committee purely for them to decide on this equally balanced decision, really, because it's a very difficult one. I can understand where they're coming from electricity-wise, because I've been there and seen the accounts years ago, and I mean years ago. But it is a difficult one. It would get rid of that oil central heating. It's nothing but a problem anyway. Been there for a long time, and that would obviously get rid of a lot of carbon emissions on both delivering and usage of. So I just want to leave it to you guys to come up with a decision on this one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Any questions of Councillor Taylor? Councillor Oram.
Thank you, Chairman. It's the same question again. Have you, as the ward councillor, received any objections to this application at all in any way?
No objections whatsoever.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, we'll now move into the debate on the application. Councillor Hodgson.
So this isn't a question, this is moving into debate. I want to cut to the chase on this one. I really understand and feel the concerns about, protecting our beautiful landscapes here. But I think we're in an emergency, and if and I remember years ago, Dartington Parish Councillor said if we treated the climate emergency, which it wasn't actually called then, it was about 2013, as a war, we would actually be pulling out all the stops to stop this happening. And we keep finding ways to not make the tough decisions. And I think, while I really understand and fully respect our landscape officer's views, which, I think we're all very sympathetic to, we've got to recognise that we're going to have to make some compromises here. We're going to have to make some serious compromises if we're to actually get through probably one of the most difficult things society has ever faced, not only in this country, but worldwide. And I think that we've got to, an organisation or an individual or somebody comes forward with a good idea which could actually start, and support others to actually do this too, I just feel we've got to really consider it carefully and not just bat it away. But I think for me also what was really relevant to what Mr. Baston said earlier on was, and it's something I sort of absolutely agree with, is that by allowing something like this into the landscape, we actually prevent further damage, because we are seeing change. We are seeing huge damage happening. These storms that are coming are doing massive damage. I mean, that building could be very seriously damaged by a big storm. The exposure and the level of weather change that we're facing into is just getting worse. And I think anybody that's had a serious flood, and there's been parts of Dartington that have been flooded a lot in the last couple of years, which hadn't happened, in the 500 years of some of those buildings. We've got some serious problems coming along. So I feel that actually this is part of the compromise that we're going to have to recognise, that we're just going to have to accept. These are temporary structures. Listening to the argument about what's happening with the hedgerows, and I proposed some slight mitigation in front. I do understand that you can't really put much behind, because actually if you started putting netting behind those panels or tuck them in behind within the area behind, you actually would start risking having bats and birds flying into that netting. So it could actually be really destructive to the wildlife. I was very pleased to see that the RSPB had lifted their objection, and so that I feel confident that organisations like that will give an honest opinion on the impact on wildlife. So I'm actually prepared to consider that we need to just, as I say, take the difficult position, but we want to really avoid being NIMBYs. We want to be the SWIMBYs as a South Hams District Council, which is nothing in my backyard, but actually something wonderful in my backyard. And if this is what something wonderful in my backyard looks like to actually help us through the crisis we're facing, then actually on that basis, I put forward that we actually propose to accept this application and against officer recommendation. So that's my proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Councillor Allen.
I'm just going to turn it back into a debate again. Sorry, Jackie. It was very interesting being able to ask questions of the applicants and also the environment. And as you said, it's our choice to make. It's not the easiest of choices because there's weight on both sides. Personally, I think that the applicant has shown that they have looking to mitigation, that they have thought about it, that they're offering ways of softening this application. And I think this is a personal opinion that if this was just in a farm, long way from any other buildings, it would be a very different case. But I think because the line of the golf club house is already there, and I know that this is lower down, and this is also separate from the actual golf course, I think the line is a continuous line, so there is precedent there already for a building. So in my mind, I think I've heard enough that I would welcome this, and also I'd applaud the golf club for taking these steps towards sustainable energy. So yeah, I'd be minded to approve this. Thank you.
So, Councillor Allen, were you seconding the proposal?
Yes, unless anybody else wants to actually discuss it before we put that forward as a proposal. They can still discuss. Yes, I am seconding it.
Thank you. As we've moved in so early, I'm going to allow further debate on this. Councillor Nix.
I tend to agree with the councillors that have already spoken, to be fair. However, obviously the golf club have suggested that they would put further screening. So could I add to their proposal that we condition that screening, that they've suggested themselves onto that application.
My understanding is that the screening is outside of the red site area, so no, it couldn't be conditioned. If members were of a view that the development was only acceptable with that additional mitigation, then it would have to be a 106 agreement with the landowner, because to my understanding it's outside the red line and it's not within, it's not on land within the control, the ownership or control of the applicant. So if that was a determining factor, it would have to be a 106 agreement. If members were happy without it, then obviously it doesn't come into play.
Thank you.
Councillor Hodgson, as you.
If you want me to qualify what I was talking about, it's actually almost in front of the panels because the sun doesn't come from there, it comes from there. So you could have something that forms a broken dark line of screening in front of the panels, which would actually really mitigate the look of sudden starkness of dark against the green of the grass. So just to, rather than just have an open fence, something that's just a bit broken up. I know they can have stuff underneath, but you want something that just breaks that line up, and it could be done very effectively, I would have thought, in 2 years of mixed growth, and it kept low.
Councillor Taylor?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the screening would have to be on the reverse side of this fence, because that would then be within the red line, not on the front of the fence, right? So you wouldn't need extra 106 agreement on that. You're not likely to get flooding up there, I can assure you that, but you'll get very high winds. The clubhouses and the trees have suffered over the years, especially in '87 when I think we lost quite a number of trees. They blew over. And somebody was suggesting about the roof of the clubhouse. Well, that was never built as a load-bearing roof, and it's quite flat, and it will retain water, so it needs a lot of maintenance. So that's an impossibility, and that's outside of what we were looking at anyway. But just to clarify the question that was asked earlier on of Councillor Baston.
Councillor Bonham.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I tend to see the points made by the officers concerned about the protection of the AONB or the national landscape and the coast, and I think we need to have very high regard, clearly, for protecting the visual views and so on. But I also want to try to balance that with the benefits, and in particular, I think a point that's not been raised is the sustainable economy and the sustainable society or community benefits that come from this, because I think we have to see the golf club and the golf course as a positive benefit to locals and to tourism, and therefore we should be supporting an organisation that wants to be sustainable in all aspects. I think, like other councillors, I want to commend them for moving in a direction of saving energy and carbon emissions. I've had the pleasure of being a visitor there. I think they're very welcoming to the local community and so on. And probably if they're similar to other golf courses, then they need to protect their financial resources and make sure that they're sustainable financially. And this is probably a step in that direction. There are some elements of this application, though, that I find disappointing. I think it's a great shame that the landowner hasn't been a little bit more flexible in allowing the proposed site to be moved a bit further south, where it will be screened a little bit more from the existing views. But overall, looking at it on the site visit and the pictures, I think the harm is not that great, and it's 40 metres or so long. I don't think it's going to be massively visible from a far distance, and if there's mitigation to screen it from the near footpath, then that's a very good thing. So I would definitely want to try and include that. If it can't be a condition, then it could be a subject to agreement that the additional screening from footpath number 6 be included. And I do also support other councillors ask that we might have a little bit more screening on the south side, although I'm struggling to work out whether that is really in practice achievable or not. But overall, I tend to think this is, on balance, a good application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Oram.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just begin with a slide that Mr. Bastone supplied with a picture of the landscape? Can we get to that, please? And just whilst we're waiting, I'll just take the opportunity to commend the commitment of Mr. Bastone to the to climate change and the climate emergency. I really appreciate your presentation earlier. So, members, let me put it to you that considering that there is going to be a backdrop of hedges and trees and other things going on in this scene, the actual clubhouse draws the eye more than the solar panels would. So that's a consideration I think we all need to consider. I just wanted to mention, Mr. Fairbairn, about the ministerial commitments of the changes to potential government. I don't think I'm being overly controversial to say that, you know, ministerial commitments are not worth the paper they're written on until they're actually official. So I don't think this committee really needs to consider anything along those lines. I am taken that there are no objections to this, you know, from a parish level, from a district ward member level, or indeed from the application itself. And if the application has been going on for 14 months, and there's plenty of opportunities for residents to have their say on the subject. So I am actually quite shocked that there's no objections to this thus far. And finally, I would just point out that there is a stigma against solar panels. People seem to be very against it, but this is the new world. You know, we are in a climate emergency. So I actually think this proposal has done quite a lot to hide the fact that there are panels there, whilst presenting their commitments to the climate emergency and to improve their business. Because we know that energy is expensive at the moment, times are tough, jobs are hard to come by. So again, I would commend the golf club for doing so much and coming up with this strategy for it. So in conclusion, Chairman, I would agree with my more learned colleagues that actually this is a bit of a no-brainer.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other members wish to? Any other comments? Yeah, we're now moving, because we have a proposer and a seconder for approval contrary to officer's recommendation. We need to sort of move into sort of the reasons, I think, are fairly clear, but whether we are looking for additional or conditions on the application for approval.
Yes, well, I think I've set out, you know, what I think. So I don't know how you work with that.
As usual in situations where if an application gets approved contrary to officer recommendation, I'm going to suggest it's a delegated approval, so the absolute wording conditions are in agreement with the chairman, proposer, and seconder. I think there's really only 4 conditions. There'll be the standard condition for time, commencement. Generally speaking, all solar panel, no matter what's provided, freestanding arrays tend to have a time limit on them, which is normally about 30 years. There need to be some landscaping plans submitted within for what is actually going to happen within the red line, and then simply built in accordance with the approved plans, including the specific levels plan. I don't think there needs to be anything more substantial or significant than that.
I think the plan was for, I think I asked yourself, Peter. I think it's 40 years these panels are meant to be. Because yeah, I'm just saying before it gets put down. I think it was 40 years because I was expecting it to be 25, but yeah, it's obviously changed. But nevertheless, still temporary.
I have no problem with whether it's 30, 35, or 40. To be perfectly honest, I think that the lifespan when I was dealing with these, 15, 20 years ago now, that it was 20 years, but the technology's moved on, so that the lifespan has definitely moved on. So I'm comfortable with 40 years.
Mr. Wyman, Councillor Taylor has a question.
Yes. Is it possible for us to protect this against turning into a brownfield site? Because what I wouldn't like to see is this turn into development site?
In a word, on one level, no, because the definition of what's commonly termed brownfield land, which is previously developed land, as soon as something has had development on it, it would fall within that previously developed land definition. However, just because something is previously developed land does not give it an automatic green light for other development. It would need to have a planning application, and you've had a number of applications in front of you over the last few years where the argument being put forward is that yes, it is in the middle, it is in the countryside, it is in the middle of nowhere, but it's a brownfield land, therefore you should approve it. And in most cases they have been refused, and we've been successful on appeal. So yes, it would, in my view, become previously developed land once developed, but that wouldn't give a green light for anything else to come forward in the future.
Councillor Bonham.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask the proposer and seconder if they would consider, maybe they're already suggesting this, modifying their recommendation so that we approve this subject to the landscaping along the side of footpath 6, which is outside the red line, but already seems to have been proposed by the proposer. And I presume they've got some agreement about this. So to me, that is an important step to screen it a little bit more, as has been suggested by many other speakers. Question then to the proposer. Thank you.
I would anticipate that it's in the applicant's best interest to screen that footpath anyway, because obviously they want to keep the site looking good, but secondly to protect those panels, because don't forget that where that footpath is, the other side of it is actually you know, if you had somebody like me on that golf course, those panels wouldn't stand a chance. So so I know that's not particularly relevant. But all I'm saying is that I'm not sure actually. I mean, I don't know what Pat's view would be on that, but I would be happy for that if that's needed.
As I've said before, the difficulty is if you want to secure. I've got no doubt. There's no doubt that in my mind, that the applicants are proposing to do it. But for us to secure it, to say yes, you've got to do it, would have to be a legal agreement that would have to be signed by the council, the applicants, and the landowner. So the only way you could do it would be approved subject to a Section 106 agreement that would inevitably delay the time from them to start, because, and I don't know whether the landowner would sign it.
You are, to a certain extent, fettering the application if you sort of put that proposal forward, because it does obviously then depend on the landowner's agreement.
But as I say, I think I get I mean, it's easy to jump to these conclusions, but I would get the impression that obviously the applicants are sitting here listening to us, as is the parish council. I get the impression there's a shared interest for the best for this, for all sorts of maybe slightly different reasons, but it's their best interest to have that golf course looking as best as it can for the benefit of the public and the people that come to the golf house. They've heard how concerns are, and I would imagine that they're going to do their best. And if but we don't want to, as you say, I don't particularly want to stand in the way of them getting this up and running, because, you know, we've got a climate emergency. We don't want another 6 months of them, you know, putting in all those tons of carbon, which doesn't need to happen. But if the landowner will accept it, then that's fine. But I would actually leave that to them, to be frank.
Mr. Weimer.
I've just had a quick conversation with colleagues that whilst I absolutely respect the view and opinion of Councillor Bonham, as officers we weren't as concerned with that hedgerow. It wouldn't be something that we would have been pushing for, but we're more concerned about the other landscaping within the red line rather than down the side.
I think we've covered the sort of points. I think Councillor Bonham understand where you're coming from, but I think it would be to exclude Councillor Allen as the seconder.
I'm actually following up on Councillor Taylor's point. It's a quick one. we talked before about potential changes from the government with the MPPF. They've already stated that any brownfield site within, well, they were talking about the Greenbelt, they might well be talking about the A and B, would actually be seen as development sites. So I don't know if we're going to lose the power to be able to make considerations on brownfield sites. So because we were taking the other point as a material concern, do we take that as a material consideration as well? Because if this became a brownfield site, it might change the way we voted. Thanks.
Planning policy might change, absolutely right. However, everything I've seen and heard so far is specifically talking about Greenbelt. We do not have any Greenbelt, and I haven't heard anything around sites within national landscapes. It's all been focused on Greenbelt. And to be fair, some of the areas I know, there are some quite sites within a Greenbelt that you think, why is this protected? So,
members, we've had good debate on this. We have a proposer, a seconder. We have the reasons for approval.
I'm comfortable from the debate. We've got the reasons for approval, and we've got a skeleton of 4 conditions that would then, the drafting would be done and go out to the proposer, seconder and chairman if approved.
And all members have heard this, they're aware of it. So I am going to move that we take this to the vote. At this point, we have a proposer and a seconder for approval contrary to officer recommendation. Can I have a show of hands for those in favour of approval, please?
Unanimous.
That is unanimous. Therefore, that application is approved, contrary to officer's recommendation. Can I thank everybody for the participation in this application?
10 minutes.
We will require a 10-minute break at this point because we have to change officer, and unfortunately, need a 10-minute break anyway. Yeah. We are moving to, somebody has to prepare for that.
Yes.
Welcome back, everybody. We'll restart the meeting. We'll now move on to planning application 053624. Mr. Weimer, do you wish to explain the situation?
Unfortunately, members, the case officer for this application isn't well today and is unable to attend committee. Mr. Whitehead, who, for those of you who are on the site visit, will recall, did attend the site visit, so has first-hand knowledge of the site, will be presenting the application in her absence.
Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, this is an application then at 10 Peters Crescent in Malden. Application is for a single-storey side and rear extension and also a front porch. This is the application site outlined with the yellow indicator. It's within the built-up part of Malden, as members saw on the site visit, within a run of bungalows and mixed development. This is a close-up. Application, as you can see, is for number 10. Currently has a single-storey side extension, and this is the front view. Members will note from the site visit there is a right-of-way between numbers 10 and 12, which I'll describe in more detail as we go through the presentation. So this is the block plan, which shows number 10. Front porch, you can see, which is, I don't believe, particularly controversial, straightforward porch to the front. I think the issue and the reason this application has been brought to committee by Councillor Penfold, apologies, is because of the potential impact on the neighbour and consideration thereof. You'll see there the extension is shown in green. It in part replaces a single-storey side extension, which I'll show in more detail, and then wraps around the back. It's a single-storey extension with a sedum roof and a lantern-style light on the roof, on the flat roof. So this is looking up the alley between the two properties. It's public right-of-way, not within the ownership of either, but this gives access to a small area of public open space at the back. The photograph on the left is looking down towards Peters Crescent from the right-of-way, so the applicant's property is on the left, and number 12, who are objecting to the application, is on the right, and then on the right-hand photograph, the opposite is true. You will see on the right-hand photograph an element of the objector's property, which is sort of yellow rendered. That is a utility room which has been built on the outside of the original dwelling. The original dwelling, as I understand it, was set in from this boundary with the public right-of-way and offered means of light towards the right-of-way from the kitchen. The applicant, or rather, sorry, the objector has since constructed this single-storey extension on the side of his property, which serves now as a utility room with a flat felted roof and the two obscure glazed windows in it, which face towards the right-of-way. So the original kitchen, if you like, is now an inner room. This is a photograph then looking down onto the applicant's property. You can see the existing single-storey side extension, the right-of-way, which is enclosed by the fence there, and the extension to the objector's property on the opposite side of the right-of-way. So comparisons then. So the existing north elevation, you can see there, that's taken obviously from the road, and you can see on the left-hand side there an existing lean-to extension which is going to be demolished. The bottom photograph then shows the proposed side extension, which, as I say, is a flat-roofed extension with a sedum roof and a lantern, which extends to the same extent to the boundary with the public right-of-way, but is higher than it. This shows you a comparison again, with the top showing the existing single-storey extension to the side, and now showing at the bottom the proposed extension, which I believe from the officer's report, and we discussed this on site, is 800 mil higher than the existing extension. This is the rear elevation, again showing a comparison of the single-storey side extension and the proposed extension to the right, which goes to the side but then wraps around the rear. And this shows, again, rear elevation or side elevation of the same extension, and you'll see it projects to the rear by some meters. So we discussed on site the concerns of the neighbour, and I believe members went inside the neighbouring property to sort of better understand the impact upon them. We've looked at this obviously in terms of the impact upon the neighbour, both in terms of light, but also in terms of the physical impact of the development, in terms of whether it results in a loss of outlook or a loss of, has an overbearing impact. I think it's important to recognise the fact that the building which is closest to the extension on the neighbour's property is a utility room, not, in our view, habitable floor space in the same way that a living room or a dining room would be. It is a utility room, it is additional accommodation. So we wouldn't describe the same value to it as we would a habitable room in the same way that we would a bathroom or a toilet. It's, to our view, not part of the valuable part of the dwelling. It's non-habitable. We have considered it against our own guidance. In terms of the impact of light, you'll know from our SPD that we have a sort of 25-degree rule, which considers the impact of extensions on adjoining properties, and there is a diagram which kind of shows it like this. So if we use this test on between numbers 10 and 12, our view is that it passes the test insofar as we would judge it against the proposed extension to the inner window which serves the kitchen, rather than the outer window which serves the utility room, which, as I say, is non-habitable floor space. So in our view, the proposal is not contrary to the advice of the council in its SPD, and in our view, the proposal would not have a demonstrable impact upon the neighbouring property. And as you'll have noted from the officer's report, we believe the application does comply with the relevant policies of the JLP, does not have demonstrable impact upon the neighbouring property in terms of light or overbearing impact, therefore complies with DEV 1, but also complies with the other policies on neighbourhood impact or other, in terms of extensions, so design, appearance, massing, etc., in DEV 20 and DEV 23. Our recommendation is therefore one of approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Any questions of the officer's report? Councillor Rake.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you again, Peter, for another concise and thorough report. Do we have to consider the impact on the public right-of-way? And I mean, I'm assuming it's a fairly narrow canyon between buildings anyway. So, but that's, I mean, we have to take that into account, I presume.
Don't believe it is a public right of way in as much as it's a public footpath. It is a right of way, but I don't believe it is designated as a footpath. But beyond that, this development will not impact upon it. It is not proposed to build on the right of way. It is simply up to the applicant's boundary.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? No, thank you. We will now move on to the first of the speakers, Mrs. Davis. Thank you. You have 3 minutes from when you switch your microphone on. Thank you.
We object to the height of the side extension as it would block an unacceptable amount of light from our dining kitchen. The high wall would be only 1.4 metres away from the windows. Being the heart of the home, any reduction in light would have a dramatic effect on our health and well-being. If a building is sited opposite windows, the 25-degree guideline applies, reference BRE 209, which most local authorities use. This protects daylight for neighbouring properties, whether residential or commercial. South Hams Council use their own supplementary planning document, CDEV 1, number 13, Appendix 1, Residential Extensions and Alterations. 13.30 to 13.34 contain a large diagram and text showing that, quote, developments must not encroach upon the 25-degree line, plus, quote, proposals which would result in a harmful loss of daylight or sunlight to a neighbouring property will be refused, the only exception to this being a conservatory. The principal lighting consultant at the British Research Establishment, using the data from the plans with his specialist desktop software, concluded the angle to be approximately 60 degrees. This would substantially reduce the daylight to the windows, being the only source of light for the dining kitchen. This clearly fails the Council's own criteria. Therefore, it is difficult to understand how this application could be recommended for approval, particularly as no light assessment was included at the planning stage. The BRE lighting specialist advised that the obvious reduction in daylight must trigger an in-depth light assessment to include any loss of skyline in the kitchen diner. His report is available to view with our objections. Whatever the current level of light to a room, any further reduction must be assessed, whether through clear or privacy glass. The question is not what light is taken away, but what light is left. Also, the windows being over 20 years old qualify for a legal right to light, which applies to any room. The plans omit to show the height of the side extension at its highest point above the footpath. We did not receive the information despite asking twice. We now understand the height, including the lantern, to be approximately 3.9 metres, which will be well above the windows and only 1.4 metres away. How can it be that a single-storey extension has to rise to within 1 metre of the ridge of the bungalow? Plus, the wall and lantern would loom large over our garden, much higher than indicated. The measurements quoted by the planner should be called into question. Photo to show this was emailed to Mr. Chairman. We were told the pathway between us was not be used for scaffolding, but now may be a possibility. The scaffolding board would totally block light from our kitchen for the many months of the build. What effect would this have on our health and well-being? Thank you.
Thank you. Your good timing there. Members, any questions of Mrs. Davis? Councillor Taylor?
Yes. Did you actually build the extension?
No, it's historical. It's been there probably 30 years plus.
But it's a utility and not a living area, yeah?
It's an extension to the kitchen, which is used as a utility room. But obviously, clearly, if it is counted as a utility room, there must be other applications put to it to test the light, which is the skyline that is visible from the kitchen. If that is reduced, that is wrong.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Councillor Nix?
I had the same question. However, I've got another. In the reading, it said the skylight was 3.3 metres, but you've said it was...
Sorry?
The skylight is 3.3 metres high, whereas you've just said it's 3.9.
3.9. Just short of 4 metres. I'm not talking about the skyline, that was the light, the lantern.
That's,
yeah,
yes, that's
yeah.
what I'm saying.
That's nothing to do with the skyline in the kitchen.
Clarify that, please.
That's actually a picture, and there is where the lantern would go above the garden.
We'll seek some clarification from the planning officer if we can.
I did actually send this to the chairman, so I thought it might be here.
Chair, without getting...
Proposal actually says the roof height is 3 metres. Yeah. Top of the lantern being
with the top of the lantern being 3.3 metres. So I've answered my own question. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions of Mrs Davis? Members? No? Thank you, Mrs Davis.
Thank you.
We'll now move on to Mr Booth. When you're ready. Thank you.
Right, thank you. We invite the committee to look carefully at the facts around our application and ignore the inflammatory and inaccurate comments that may have been shared. Our family have lived in Malden since 2008. My daughters were born in our house. We do not wish to be forced out of the village, which we call home. This is our third planning application, which followed the pre-planning advice from South Hams Council. We have been advised that the proposal is acceptable, meets the requirements set, the regulations including the light, and is in line with the joint local plan, which supports families to remain in their communities. We believe that the extension is modest, proportionate, and is in keeping with many other extensions that have been built in the road, including that of number 12. Malden Parish Council have approved the planning application, and we have the support of our parish councillors. South Hams councillors, planners, also support the planning application. The sole objector has lobbied hard to the neighbours and councillors with unfounded objections against all of our applications. This has had an enormous impact on our family. The final objection is inaccurate and has taken up yet more valuable time and resource. Our daughter begins her GCSEs in September. We had timed everything so that we would have a bedroom for her to study and sleep in by the time her academic year started. This targeted action has delayed this and will have a direct impact on her. We also need to provide an environment that is free from damp and mould for our younger daughter. Slide 2, please. You've visited the site, you've seen the gardens in our row south facing, you've been made aware of the significant bush and hedge that we've removed to prepare for this building works. Whether any impact on the light from number 12 from our property, this could only be in the positive as a result of the removal of this bush. Slide 3, please. You'll see and be aware that properties 8, 12 and 14 have extensions to the side already, in the same vein as our proposal. The gap between these extensions and neighbouring properties is less than the gap that will be between ours and number 12. I can confirm that there's no impact on light into the kitchen caused by the extension on number 8. Number 12 already have a large extension, but yet are objecting to our extension. This just doesn't seem fair or right. If this planning application is not approved, it would not be technically right in my view, but morally wrong. The planning application has already been approved by Malden Parish Council, South Hams and Council Plannings. We've got the support, we've done everything that we can, we've tried to comply with everything, and we believe it meets with the local plan. We just want to stay in our home. Thank you for your consideration. We're happy to answer any questions.
Mr Booth, thank you. Perfect timing. Members, any questions, Mr Booth? Councillor Allen?
I completely understand all the concerns and issues around this, so just a sort of straightforward questions. Is there a particular reason why the side extension, which is closest to your neighbour's house, is as high as it is, but the lantern is as high as it is?
I think the lantern is, I guess, see-through, so there shouldn't be any impact.
Not particularly meaning the lantern, I'm just meaning the actual height.
I think it's what the architect drew, and there is consideration from an ecological perspective and water perspective to have a living roof.
Yeah.
So that adds a little bit of height to it, but not marginal. But we had this massive bush there, which we cut down. So if we hadn't taken down that bush,
but not considering the bush.
Sorry,
It's
sorry.
Going ahead, I mean, is there a possibility of making it slightly lower if that is the main concern, or is that not something that you would consider?
It's not something that's South
We
West
are,
Water.
Councillor,
I know, but I'm
we are
just
considering what's before us today, not.
But it would be interesting to know if there's an absolute rationale for the size of it.
That's a question that is unfair of the applicant at this point.
No, fair enough. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Bonham.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks for your explanation there. I'm just wondering what is the functional use of the side, because it sounds like the back part or the rear-facing extension is a bedroom, perhaps. But what is the? Or maybe you could answer that. But what is the functional purpose of the bit at the side? And I do have a follow-up as well, but.
So the back part is to allow for, I guess, the kitchen area, but we need extra bedroom space. And so it's us. I mean, I don't really want to go into this because of it's recorded and live, but it's really required for us.
I think that's sufficient answer there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. When we visited the site, we heard, and I don't know if this is true or not, we avoided excavating some of the back garden, and we heard, and I pose this as a question, that you have a fallback plan, which is to only do the rear-facing extent.
Councillor Bonham,
Not
that's
fair?
not appropriate. We're looking at what's before us, not conjecture. Thank you. Any other questions? No other question, Mr. Booth? Mr. Booth, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We'll now move on to Councillor Penfold, ward member. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Councillor Penfold, ward member for Malden Little Hempston. I'd like to thank the planning committee members for their time coming to Malden ward on the site visit to consider this matter. It's important that all residents get to see that they do get careful consideration from a planning committee of democratically elected peers when concerns or objections are raised. I'd like to thank all the planning officers involved in this planning proposal, as I know many questions have been asked to understand this situation. I asked for this, for the planning committee to consider this. Although there were a series of objections raised by number 12, after talking to the planning officer, I'm confident that these will be overcome by careful conditions placed by the planning department. I also felt these concerns were transitory in nature and would be sorted by the completion of the project. And as I stated, there's no other objections and none from the parish council, so it becomes a matter between number 10 and number 12. The one concern that may have impact, and that was raised by number 12 that I felt needed further scrutiny, was the matter of the light that would be available to the kitchen of number 12 after the extension had been built. I understand there's no general right to light. However, I also understand an easement of light can exist. Okay, our local joint plan, Dev 1, Protecting Health and Amenity, states that any new development must provide for satisfactory daylight, sunlight outlook and privacy for existing residents. It is my understanding that the assessment of the impact of the light on the neighbour's property can be a matter of planning judgment, and there's no hard and fast rules that dictate that if a certain parameter or number is exceeded, an application must be refused. I'm also aware that to help officers, there are guidelines in our supplementary planning guidance referred to the 45% or 25% rule, and that if these are breached, it is an indication that a planning officer would need to consider carefully the decision. I also understand these rules are intended to seek to protect living conditions within habitable rooms such as bedroom, living rooms and kitchens. But as each application can be determined on its own merits and there can be subtle differences, there may be a consideration in this case, especially since the nearest room to the proposed extension is a utility room, which has been built immediately in front of the kitchen. And so the kitchen relies on borrowed light from the utility room, which also has obscured glazing. This means the utility room will be the room most affected. However, it will have an impact on the kitchen, and therefore this is where the considered decision of the planning committee would be most helpful in determining if this is a reasonable impact. There is no doubt it will impact the light in the kitchen, but the question is how much and whether this is a reasonable amount. The last thing I would like to note is this: it involves two families who live alongside one another but at very different stages of their lives. What each one does impacts the other. one family who is growing and reasonably needs additional room to comfortably accommodate their family, and one family who wish for the continuity of the conditions of the home they carefully chose to live in. Finally, a decision each way will impact both neighbours, but I hope with the decision coming to the planning committee, both sets of neighbours will see that South House has not taken any decision lightly and have given it careful consideration and time.
Thank you, Councillor Penfold. Members, any questions of Councillor Penfold? No? Thank you. You escaped lightly there. Right.
We've let you off.
Members, thank you. We have concluded the presentations. We'll now move into the debate on this and recognise that a number of members did go into both number 10 and number 12. So if you may wish to bring that up in your any comments you may wish to make on this application. Do I have anybody who wishes to open the debate? Councillor Allen.
Yes, I'm happy to. I'm one of the people who went into the neighbouring properties and so saw the impact that any raised roof might have. If anybody would like to ask me about that, nobody has yet. It's like it is a dark space. I think I would say that, and I can see the concerns of the neighbours as to any more loss of light, but as was explained to us, it's all about angles with the habitable space, and so therefore it feels to me like it's always around the issue of the outlying building, and I think that's a very difficult one for us to overcome if it's outside our recommendations. I think we'd have to have a very good reason to say that the loss of light is compelling. If that made any sense at all.
Any other councillors? Any comments? Councillor Rake.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at the proposed east elevation, and although it's an increase in height, much of that does stand in front of we got it up on the screen. Thank you, Peter. That's very helpful. Do you need to take that, Councillor Bunham? Okay.
He does not need to take that.
Say hi from me. So yeah, and that helpfully projects the number 12's extension onto the side of the proposal. And much of the it's a narrow distance from the gable end there to the edge of the proposed extension, and much of it therefore is shaded not by the extension but by the gable end. I mean, I think I've that plus the angle drawing that we've seen, I find it hard to be convinced that the impact on light will be that significant.
Councillor Hodgson.
I agree with those points that have been made about this. As much as I really respect that, you know, for anybody facing into a development happening, you know, immediately next door to them, it can be quite alarming and worrying about, you know, even just the time of when it's actually being built. That can be very disruptive, but it is at least short term. And in terms of the, you know, the ongoing benefit to all the community, these I'm looking at some of the plans that are on the website, and these are very modest houses. They're they're fairly constrained, and you know, when you've got youngsters growing up, you want them to be able to, you know, flex their muscles, do their exams, have places to be. But, you know, and I think it's really important to, you know, help make these from relatively quite modest houses into maybe more family-size homes. So I really understand where the applicants are coming from, and also, you know, I would just give it perhaps a bit of assurance to the neighbours that, you know, what might seem rather alarming at the moment probably won't be as bad as they think it's going to be by any stretch of the imagination, for the reasons that have been pointed out. You know, it's not a massive difference, and it is a utility room. So I'm happy to support the officer's recommendation.
Councillor Hodgson, are you moving?
Not moving out, I'm moving the proposal, yes.
Councillor Oram.
Thank you, Chairman. My first concern is that the objection had a figure for the height of the extension that was not recognised by the planning officer. So I'm a bit worried from the outset that the objector actually has the wrong figures and is the bulk of their argument to objecting to this application, which has been cleared up by the officer. It is a tasteful application. They've gone through all the correct procedures. The rules are tied up in a nice neat bow and everything seems to be all in order. I can't see any reason why this should be refused on any basis. And I'm sure the whole committee will join me in wishing Miss Booth all the best in her GCSEs. And thank you for your presentation, Mr. Booth. I really appreciate that. Thank you,
Councillor Oram, are you therefore seconding Councillor Hodgson's proposal?
Why on earth not?
Thank you, Councillor Oram.
Thank you, Chairman.
Members, any further comments on this application? I don't see any further comments. We have a proposer and seconder to accept the officer's recommendation of approval, conditional approval. If I don't have any further comments, I will take it to the vote. So can I have a show of hands, please, for approval of this application as officer recommendation?
Unanimous.
Thank you, members. That is unanimously approved. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Members of the public, for that last, you are able to leave now if you wish, if you so wish. We'll now move on to the third application and we've got a few minutes for changeover of officers. Thank you. Members, please. We'll now move on to application 149824. The officer is Richard Geary and the recommendation is conditional approval. So, Mr. Geary, if you can take us through the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, as I think it now is. So this is 5 Valleyside. in the small settlement of Buckland. The outline in red shows you the proposal site. We have some aerial imagery giving you an idea of exactly where that is. We are in the national landscape. We are at the edge of the settlement of Buckland. So Five Valley Side is a two-storey semi-detached property. It's one of 6 in a row. The row is arranged in 3 pairs, and we are at the easternmost end, and we're the western of the eastern pair, if that makes sense to you. So all the properties in the row are of a similar construction, a 2-storey element, and then a side element that is single-storey and flat-roofed. You'll notice a conservatory on number 5. That's the only conservatory in the row. It was granted permission in 2016. And so it's the only example in the row. Constraints on the site are we're in the national landscape, but there are no other constraints and no heritage constraints on the site. Proposal before us is a scheme of extension and alteration comprising the removal of the UPVC conservatory, an additional rear extension, single storey, the addition of a storm porch to the side elevation, and internal alterations including a loft conversion with roof lights. We also have some minor groundworks to facilitate drainage, and we have some solar PV, approximately 4 kilowatts onto the roof. So the motivation behind the application, as I understand it, is, as you can see on the floor plan there, that the space in the ground floor is quite inflexible, and there's a loss or a lack of light coming into the main living space. This is caused by a wall between the existing conservatory and the main living space that the family uses. So the proposal, sorry, just passing on slightly. So externally, the dominant feature of the house is the front conservatory. And at the rear, which I'll put a picture up for you there, which is a modern construction in white UPVC, and with quite a significant quantity of glazing. At the rear, we have a garden that slopes away from the house. It's quite a dark area. It doesn't relate particularly well to the internal spaces. There's no way of coming in and out of the internal spaces into the garden. And that's something that this proposal seeks to improve on. So the proposal seeks to replace the conservatory at the front with a smaller sunroom. That's to be roofed in natural slate with some small roof lights rather than existing glazed roof. Proposal also seeks to erect an extension to the rear of the property. This extension has been designed so as to not take light away from the neighbouring property. That will create a flexible family space that's more suited to a modern family. This is also achieved by removing the chimney stack, as you'll see in the updated floor plan, removing the chimney stack, removing some internal walls, and moving the stairway. This allows the applicants to open up the space. You'll notice that the removal of the wall at the front between the sunroom and the dining space brings natural light into the main living space of the dwelling. The proposal also introduces a 4th bedroom at second floor in the loft conversion, and this is lit by 6 modestly sized roof lights. To show you a 3D example of what the proposal will look like, you'll notice that there are louvres to the sunroom wall. This is designed to make the space more usable. As with lots of conservatories of that time, the existing conservatory is too warm in the summer, too cold in the winter, and there's been an attempt made here to make it more usable, and it can moderate the amount of lights coming in and also the amount of light spill out of the proposed sunroom. So the key issues here are the design. We're in the national landscape, so it's important to consider the design of the property. Officers consider that the removal of the conservatory is an uplift in design, so the replacement with the sunroom is an uplift. It uses natural materials in the form of slate, it has less glazing, and it creates more usable space for the applicants in the property. The extension to the rear is not visible from the public realm, This means we have less consideration of the design at the rear in relation to the national landscape. Roof lights and solar panels, which will be added as part of the proposal, are evident in the street already. You see some extra pictures. This gives you an idea of what we're talking about. I've included this slide because one of the things that we're considering with this is the neighbour amenity. So we wanted to show, we're mindful of an objection from the parish council around neighbour amenity, and we wanted to show that this, which is number 4, the neighbouring property, also has a door to the side elevation. It also has windows to the side elevation. So it'll be similar to the proposal. And at the rear, the second part of the objection is relating to the natural light to number 6, which is the neighbouring property. So we asked the architect to commission a sunlight study, and this shows the extent of sunlight reaching the neighbouring property at 3 PM on the 15th of March. That will be the same on the 15th of September, and shows that there's adequate light into the rooms at the rear of number 6. Final issue we were discussing is the reduction in glazing to the conservatory, which is reducing glazing and light spill into the environment, which is one of the objections from the parish council. There is a modest overall increase in glazing on the property, but that's in keeping with the street. As we've shown on some of the pictures, roof lights are already in existence in the street. We don't consider that the modest increase in glazing is out of character with the street as it is. In conclusion, the alterations create additional flexible floor space for a modern family, largely within the existing footprint of the building. We believe it shows an uplift in design quality at the front elevation, that it respects neighbourhood amenity and introduces renewable energy into the area. And we recommend conditional approval.
Thank you, Mr. Geary. Members, any questions?
Yeah, yes. Have we any idea of percentage of less glass? Because I mean, obviously this conservatory is coming down. It looks to me as if there's quite a lot less glazing in the new extension. This is on the front edge where the conservatory is now, because that is obviously impacts on light pollution. And if it looks to me as if there's 60% or more less glazing on that side.
There's a significant loss of glazing to the roof of the conservatory. It's been replaced by 3 very modest roof lights. Overall, in the entire project, there is an increase in glazing. It's approximately 15% from our calculations, but at the front, it's a reduction in glazing, as we understand it, especially in the vertical plane of the roof of the conservatory.
Thank you. Councillor Rake?
On the same point, I suppose, at the moment, the conservatory has a solid wall at the back of it, which will be removed. Am I correct in that?
Yes, that's correct.
So, from that point of view, and strictly in terms of light spill, if they're at night, for instance, if the lights are on in the house at the moment, they're not getting through the wall. Whereas in future, if the lights are on in the house, then the new sunroom will be illuminated as well.
So in theory, yes, there'd be some deflected light from the internal spaces. It would be quite reduced.
So, but if there's no wall there, it's just going to come straight through, and it's not deflected light.
Sorry if I explain. So the light would be coming downwards from the ceiling, we're presuming, so it then deflects off surfaces to come outwards. It wouldn't be direct light spilling straight out of the windows.
Now I'm very confused. Can we go back to the plans? So there's now no wall where on the front of the house. That's been removed.
Yes, I think I understand where you're coming from. So in theory, yes, light that is in the dining area could spill out through the front of the property, but in my opinion, that would be diffused. It wouldn't be immediately pointing straight out of the windows. And we're obviously lacking glazing in the roof space of the sunroom. We've got only very modest skylights in there, so I don't think it would be quite as much of an impact.
I wasn't. I was just. I totally agree with you. I was just trying to understand what was going on.
Thank you. Any other questions, Councillor Bonham?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I perhaps wonder if you could comment on the objection from the parish council. I mean, there seem to be a couple of different elements that they're concerned about, and I wonder how you've taken these into account, whether you feel that there's any validity or whether there's any mitigation. They've talked about overbearing of the building, potential noise and light, which I think you've already touched on briefly. But light detracting from the windows of the neighbouring property. So how do you judge those elements of their concern? Thank you.
So as I understand it, the objections from the parish council are in three parts. So there's an overbearing objection, which we contest. We are seeing an extension at the rear of approximately 20 square metres, which is quite modest. It's been deliberately designed to be recessed from the neighbour, and the agent and the applicant have revised their original submission, which was a full width extension, to recess it from the neighbour to be less overbearing. There's also a pitched roof which slopes away. It's quite shallow, and we've assessed that not to have an overbearing impact on the neighbour. There's another issue in regard to the orientation of the building. So the parish has contested that moving the primary access to the side changes the orientation of the building. We found on site that the majority of these buildings in this row have side entrances, and from my observation and from discussions with neighbours, they all use those side entrances as their main entrance. So I didn't consider that the reorientation argument had an awful lot of validity. The final objection was in regards to glazing and dark skies. Again, I think roof lights are a feature of the street already, and I think it's questionable how much in a residential context 6 roof lights will add detriment to the dark skies. So we assessed that wasn't too detrimental impact, especially with regard to the national landscape.
Members, any further questions? Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, I believe I'm correct in saying there was no neighbourly objections on this, because obviously the weather porch or the weather storm porch would impact a little bit on that side, but there's no objections from neighbours.
No, we've had no objections. It is worth saying that this is a resubmission. The applicant chose to withdraw an earlier submission on the basis of discussions with their neighbour at number 6. So they reacted to comments from number 6, withdrew the original and came back with something that was acceptable to all neighbours.
If no other comments or questions, we'll move on to speakers on this, and we move to Mr. Ashton. Thank you. You have 3 minutes when you're ready. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Michael Ashton and I live at 5 Valleyside, sorry. Thanks for letting me speak today. I'd like to start by saying that Eve, my wife, and I feel very privileged to be able to raise our young family in West Buckland. It's very clear to see why it's been designated an area of outstanding natural beauty. Since moving to the village 3.5 years ago, we have enjoyed becoming part of the community. Eve and I run a successful physiotherapy clinic just up the road in Modbury, which we feel offers a valuable service to the local community. Our daughter attends Thurleston Primary and our son is down on the beach in Hope Cove. We appreciate how much members of the local community are keen to ensure that both the natural beauty and West Buckland's sense of community remain unspoiled. For this reason, we have tried to be sensitive to any concerns and as considerate as possible when planning our renovations. We value the relationships we have with our neighbours in our row of houses on Valleyside, and throughout the planning process we have kept neighbours informed and revised our plans multiple times to ensure that we have minimal impact upon them.
When the opportunity arose to purchase the property in West Buckland, we jumped at the chance, despite the fact that there was a little less space than we might have hoped for with a growing family. As the children have grown, it has become clear that we do need more space, and so our options are to either expand our home or move to a larger property. The cost of upsizing in West Buckland and the near surrounding area would unfortunately be out of our price range, which is probably the case for other young families. Moving elsewhere would have a negative impact on the relationships we have worked hard to build and potentially on our business. Therefore, our hope would be to be able to expand our home as per our application. The current house layout and the space arrangement inside and outside is difficult with a young family. We currently don't have a dining area or a spare bedroom. With our plans, we have aimed to improve the look of the front of the house and optimise our use of outdoor space for the children to play by reducing the size of the current conservatory. The conservatory location blocks our view and our use of the front of the house and is unfortunately not only an eyesore but not a usable indoor space, being too hot in the summer and too cold in the winter. We have aimed to increase the comfort and flow of the house to be able to fully enjoy our wonderful view. Opening the living space gives us a much needed dining area, with the rear extension providing a space for a children's play area and office space as we do much of our clinic admin from home. The loft conversion gives us an extra bedroom, which means we don't have to ask our guests to sleep on sofas when they come to stay. We both have elderly parents living in Wales and Ireland, and hosting them is difficult with our current arrangement. With all our ties to the area, we are hoping to remain in our current house for the foreseeable future by making the adjustments that have been submitted. We hope that our plans will allow us to remain living in West Buckland, allow us to optimise the space we have, and improve the look of the front of the house, whilst remaining considerate of both neighbours and our beautiful environment. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ashton. Concise. Thank you for that. Members, any questions of Mr. Ashton? No? Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Move on to our next speaker, Councillor Lewis, Thurleston Parish Council.
Right, because so much has been discussed already and clarified, I'll take the first thing, which is the dark skies policy. 6 new roof lights, there's already 2 existing, so that would be 8 new roof lights, and we think that is excessive given the dark skies policy. In terms of design and position, it's a highly visible site set on the slope of the valley, and it will be the only property that will have a wrap-round extension of a single pitch roof. All the other extensions are flat roof to the side, apart from one, where they have one at the rear, which is a flat roof and is much narrower. And we consider that the design of the proposal is contemporary and does not sit in the landscape, and it is reflecting the distinctive style of the landscape. We all appreciate the reduction in the conservatory, but it doesn't mitigate the fact that so there are 1, 2, 3, 4 of these, 2, and they're detached. You can see them from the north, the west, the east, the south. They are highly, highly visible. Yes, the land slopes above, which does help to protect them, but this extension it wraps round the whole of the building. And I think that we would still consider the design should be locally distinctive, reflecting local style, scale and character. And I'm going to finish there because I think you've actually covered all the other points. I think they're the relevant ones that remain. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Any questions of Councillor Lewis? Councillor Allen.
Yes, we're talking about the design of it. So yes. the major issue for you is to the extension to the side, because it has a flat roof. You were talking
No, not at all. The main consideration, I think, is given the scenic beauty and we're in the protected landscape, is the contemporary nature of the design. And though that's a single story extension at the rear, the pitch goes up, as you can see, to below the bottom of the top floor window. So it is actually, though it's only 20 metres, I mean, it's still a considerable extension, square metres. The size of that at the back, and then it continues, as you can see. So it wraps all the way around. So it actually effectively is a very large wraparound extension. I know it doesn't come, it's under the 50%. I know it falls into all the criteria. I know the light spill doesn't affect next door, but that is still, I think that extension must be 3, if not 4 meters in depth. That's a deep, deep extension. It is sizable, and it doesn't sit in the landscape in the, I think, in the distinctive style it should, because it is a contemporary design.
Thank you.
Councillor Bonham.
Well, the question of fact, really, which is, do you know what the age of the building is? Because what I'm getting at here is, I'm struggling to see how a design. I mean, it looks like it's a sort of 50s building, but do you know the age of the building?
I would say it was 50s, 60s. I think they started off as council houses.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions of Councillor Lewis? No? Thank you, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you.
Thank you. As the ward member, I brought this to committee. So the reason I brought it to committee was because of the strength of the parish council's objections to it, and they covered their key areas of the dark skies and the sort of design elements and local distinctiveness. And I wanted it to come before to committee so that the committee could consider this and see whether the interpretation of the neighbourhood plan by the parish council, and it's their neighbourhood plan, and those elements is appropriate in this particular consideration. Can I say that obviously the applicant has made changes to it, has listened to officers. The officer has gone through various sort of elements and covered off a lot of the topics there. So what I'm looking for the committee to do is to look at this and see whether basically the elements around it, the national landscape, the design, the elements in the neighbourhood plan, whether the interpretation and the application of the neighbourhood plan's policies by the parish council is appropriate in this particular case. So at that point, I'll leave it for the committee members to decide whether the parish council's objections are appropriate in this case. Thank you. Do you have any questions of me? Thank you. Right, as we've closed the official, that's all of the speakers on this, and we'll move into debate on this, if appropriate. And I can see the first hand up is Councillor Abbott.
Hi, thanks. It's interesting to hear this this debate enunciated, but the perspective that I have is that the conservatory at the front is already a contemporary design, and indeed is not as fitting into the landscape, I would think, as the new proposal. That the extension is wraparound or larger doesn't impact upon the view, really. So I accept that if one was to build a house in some hidden location, that's not, we've had examples before, no precedent, but we have had examples before where that's not a goer. But if this is about fitting in with the village and that it's hidden away, I just don't think that's a key issue. I don't object on those reasons.
Thank you. Councillor Bonham.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think what we've heard is a fairly clear set of objections from the parish council, but I think I've also heard from the planner, Richard, thank you, that you've taken those points into account and just taking them one at a time. The distinctive design, I'm not sure how a distinctive design could be very much better, given that it's maybe a 1950s house. I think it's not a modernist design that's been proposed. It's got a pitched roof, it's tried to be sympathetic. I feel it's probably about as reasonable as could be expected in terms of fitting in with the style of houses in that row. In terms of the dark skies, yes, there are some new windows, but there's also a reduction in the glazing overall. And on the neighbour impact, well, I think there's been a lot of mitigation, and I appreciate the applicant has done quite a lot of work to modify their previous designs and reduce the impact on neighbours, and probably done about as good a job as could be expected on that point. So while I've listened to the parish council concerns, I tend to think that this is quite a good outcome, and those are not major issues in my mind. I would tend to support this application in line with the officer's report. So perhaps I can move acceptance.
Thank you, Councillor Bonham.
Thank you.
Councillor Nix.
Yes, I agree with both previous speakers actually about the design. 1950s design wasn't sort of box-like. This gives it a little bit of character. I was going to comment, the reason I put my hand up on the dark skies policy, whilst I understand the parish council's view of, the extra skylights, actually, you've taken away that huge glazed conservatory, so the impact will probably be less. So mitigation's been put in there, so I'd like to second Councillor Bonham's proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Nix. Councillor Taylor?
I don't need to go.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Allen?
Yes, just to feedback. Just in relation to the design, well, I totally understand where you're coming from. I think the thing that stands out to me particularly is that it's a design all in one piece, and so often we see one extension and then a shed and another extension. It all starts getting a bit sort of messy and bitty, and I think that's a common look in the countryside. You sort of you build, piecemeal. Houses have to move and change and adapt, and I would rather see a sort of thoughtful, what seems to me a practical design here, of using good materials, as the officer pointed out. I think this is potentially could be seen as a bit of an exemplar, which is to improve a house practically and also to be considerate of neighbours. I think that should be applauded. Absolutely understand about design. That's not taking away from those concerns, but I would applaud that approach personally. Thank you.
Councillor Rake.
Thank you, Chair. I concur with Councillor Allen. It's not the first time ever. We frequently agree, Councillor Allen. Just not on important things. Anyway, let's leave that for a later date. I concur with Councillor. Completely lost my thread now. I think also one point that hasn't been mentioned is that as properties age, and obviously properties age at different rates, and periods of our past we were not necessarily at the top of our game when it came to building. As properties age, they either have to be replaced or modernised, and we know that the carbon impact of replacement is much higher in the general case than that of modernisation, and therefore I think it's having a sort of, I think this is a sensitive and I can quite understand needed modernisation. I do take the parish council's concerns very seriously, and I think it's actually very unfortunate that they've been unable to support this application. But I have to say, on balance, and having listened to and read through their objections carefully, I'm afraid I'm not fully swayed by them. So I would tend to support Councillor Bonham's motion.
Thank you. Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just say this isn't. I'll be frank. It's not my taste, and a lot of this, I suppose, comes down to a bit of subjectivity as well in some of it. I mean, I would look at this and feel it looks like it's been designed from the inside out as opposed to the outside in, and it's like it feels a little bit kind of higgledy-piggledy. And I would have thought there could have been perhaps something a little bit more overall that kind of resonated as a kind of a part of the main house. It feels like it's just tagged on. But that said, that's just personal. But I'm just being honest, and I think that maybe is what's been fueling a little bit of this, controversy from the parish council, which I fully understand. But I would say there is mitigation. There is mitigation because when we were standing in front of the house, finishing up the conversation on Monday, we were standing under trees. There's quite a lot along the front, which actually will soften a lot of this in terms of the overall viewpoint, which I appreciate we need to bear very carefully in mind. Up behind the house, as you can see on the top right-hand side of those drawings, the land goes steeply up behind, so there's a lot of a lot of that is fairly hidden and mitigated, and so. While it's, as I say, while I wouldn't sort of have done it that way, that's the right way of saying it. I think it's something that is a necessary addition to modern housing, is to make them sort of better and accommodate the living space, let more light in, make it more sort of somewhere nicer to be, and so I will be supporting this application.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. I will at this point make some further comments in the fact that I think any design is subjective. It's depends on the eye. I wanted this to come before committee so that the views and the sort of opinions of committee could be heard by the parish council to make sure that their interpretation and their application of the neighbourhood plan, particularly when it comes to design and impact on the locality and neighbourhood, is understood. So there's a good number of views that have come from members today, and I think it's a good way of testing neighbourhood plans and councillors' views. Yes, I think some of the views about the style, as Councillor Hodgson said, does and may have brought the problems or the comments, the concerns from the parish council. But what it is doing, as has been raised, is improving a house, bringing it up to standard, allowing a family to sort of have the accommodation that they need in the area so they can stay in the area. And I think that's very important, particularly important for an area like Buckland, like Thurleston, where we need families living in the area. So it's not, I don't think the parish council's comments were in that aspect, but it certainly was raising about the style. And I think that we may not like it, but I think in the general terms, it is acceptable in the area because it is relatively low key, it's relatively hidden from the front and the rear. Personal choice is another thing, but it provides what they want and is not that substantially difficult to sort of accept. I do appreciate changes have been made by the applicant, and I think that's very good. And I wish other applicants would do the same. Mr. has done a lot of work on this, and his report covered all of the points on it. So I think generally, yes, I think that the parish council should take a steer from this committee as to the view and how they view applications, minor applications like this on style, design and impact, just to sort of see each one in their merits. But I think on this one, obviously the majority of the committee do not agree with it. One of the things I would ask is, there is an overall increase in glazing by roof lights, which by their nature do push light up. And I know there's a lot more that is being done around the area because it is on the edge, and whether we could have a condition for low emission glazing to those roof lights to reduce. I know there are other roof lights in the neighbourhood, but we're not addressing those. With the outward, and has been raised by sort of Councillor Rake, there will be, because walls are coming down, some additional light coming out, but we're losing a conservatory with a lot of glazing on it. But I just wonder whether we could have a condition on those roof lights to sort of acknowledge the dark skies policy and what the parish council tried to do on dark skies? Thank you.
I'm mulling it over.
Thank you. Any other comments on the application? If not, the officers will give guidance on condition.
It's nice that you've left the last application to throw the best curveball. I suppose my answer is two ways, really. Yes, you could put a condition on around details of the glazing to be submitted to the authority, and that we expect it to be one that emits the least amount of light possible. However, one of the basic tests for conditions is the development acceptable without that condition? So is it a necessary condition, or is it simply something that's desirable? So if it's something that this is okay, but that condition will make it better, then I don't believe that's a lawful condition, because the development would be acceptable without the imposition of that condition. Does that help?
It does help, and I think the issue and the reason I raise it is that there have been other applications out there where roof lights have been had a 40% or whatever level, and I think it is that question, and I think it's one of those questions because the parish council has particularly raised the dark skies, and I know the parish council have an issue around the impact on the dark skies of glazing, but obviously take guidance from officers.
Without risking to incur the wrath of the chairman, I haven't actually heard any members say, in terms of the dark skies, that the application is unacceptable. So I do wonder whether or not the condition would be accepted. Is a necessary condition.
I would want to potentially double check, but I have a suspicion that the roof lights are also probably permitted development.
I suspect so as well. But I just raise it so that we're aware. I think there will be further discussions around the dark skies, and I think it's appropriate to raise it at this point. Thank you.
Some years ago, we did condition some blinds to go on roof lights at a property in Dipford. Whether or not that's because of the dark skies issue, which had been a subject of concern, and with the parish council as well, if I remember correctly. And we did condition it. Whether it's actually happened or not is another matter. But I don't know whether, because we've basically created a precedent there, would that be able to be repeated again?
I would caveat against it, simply because even if you could condition, you put blinds, you absolutely can't condition that they close them when it's dark. So I don't think it would then fulfil the purpose or the intention of putting the condition on in the same way. If you said if it's a big patio window, you've got to have curtains. Yeah, well, they could put the curtains, but they could never close them, so you're still going to get the light spill. So if there was a significant concern that a condition was needed, I would prefer going down the lines of doing something with the glazing, because the glazing is then installed like it, rather than almost a retrofit, curtains, blinds, shades, shutters, anything like that, that then you're still reliant on the occupier and future occupiers actually using them.
Thank you. And the question has been put to me, would we refuse this application if we didn't have low emission glazing? So I think that's the aspect. And I just put that out there. I think members, we have had a long conversation on this and very thorough conversation. Councillor Allen?
It struck me when you said in support of the parish council's dark sky policy, because obviously we would want to be supportive of that. Would it be possible for me to put forward a motion? I don't know all the technical words for it. Supplement to the main motion to accept this application, saying we'll accept it with glazing, or is that not something I can do? Reflective glazing.
Sorry, Councillor, are you proposing an amendment? Because
yes.
To the proposal.
I'm asking if I can propose an amendment on those grounds. I'm not.
You can propose an amendment to that effect.
Okay.
It's non-reflective, actually. Not reflective.
You vote on the amendment first.
You can propose the amendment.
I would like to propose the amendment then, please, that we accept this application, but with the condition that there is glazed, non-reflective glass on the roof lights. Thank you.
I think we've gone through. I think we've gone through this. We've gone through this, and I think it's low emission. But that surely, that would be. I think, for clarity, Mr. Weimer, is what I sort of suggested with a condition. And if you're saying so, really, we've already gone through that. So putting that forward, I don't think is moving us any farther forward on it.
Sorry, with the question. The question that committee need to ask themselves, or members need to ask themselves, is the imposition of that condition for lower emission glazing necessary? If it's not necessary, then you shouldn't be imposing it. That's quite clear from the tests of a planning condition. And I think also on top of this, if those roof lights are permitted development, which I think they are, then I would question, one, is it necessary, and should you be imposing a condition on something that is in itself permitted development?
Mr. Weimer, I'm happy to accept that's the guidance that's been given to us. So I think, moving back in my position as chairman, we have a proposer and a seconder to accept this application as approved, conditional approval. If there's no other further comments, I'm happy to take it to the vote. So can I have a show of hands, please, for officer recommendation of conditional approval for this application? Thank you, everybody. We've concluded the planning applications, but we now move on to planning appeals. Can I thank Mr. Geary for his presentation on this, and thank the speakers for the last application, and they can now leave, but we will carry on with our business. I know there are some members who may have to leave at this point. Thank you. Right, members, we'll move on to the agenda item 7, planning appeals update. Mr. Weimer.
Thank you, members. Probably about the third or fourth different format for presenting appeals. This is probably the most comprehensive so far, because I asked one of my colleagues to deal with it in my absence. So going through the list, the first one is 1 Follaton House in Bickley. I'm sure we've had site visits here on more than one occasion. So it was a replacement dwelling. It was a delegated refusal on the grounds on the given on the slide. This is the site. Fundamentally, it's not really a replacement dwelling. There's an extent planning permission for the subdivision of 1 dwelling to 2 that they were putting forward that, well, actually, if we get this, we won't do that. So there's no net increase. The inspector concluded there was no mechanism to secure the non-implementation of the extent scheme, so it has to be viewed as a new dwelling in an unsustainable location. So it was rejected in principle. But they found that the visual impact would have been acceptable and accepted if the scheme had taken a face value. It was to replace a small dwelling with a small dwelling, and the rest could be conditioned, but in principle it was unacceptable because of the location of the site. Yeah.
Sorry, just for my own education, Pat. When an inspector does this,
yep,
and says A, B, and C were acceptable, D, E, F weren't, and therefore the appeal is dismissed, does that mean that if the applicant returns with an application with A, B, and C still in it, we automatically have to accept those as now being acceptable?
I would say yes. So if you've got and similarly, if you have an application that we refuse on, say, 4 grounds, and it goes to appeal, and the inspector goes through those 4 grounds, says actually 3 of those grounds I don't agree with, it's perfectly acceptable, and they come back in with an application to deal with the final ground, it would be unreasonable behaviour for the authority if we continue to refuse it on the grounds that the inspector has already looked at and said, no, that's fine. And that, in my view, that would leave us very much open for a cost award, because those issues have already been considered by the inspector and found to be acceptable.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, whilst it was on the board, because it's unfortunate, because this application came through when not long after the election, and this is in my ward, and I missed the opportunity to bring it to committee because we're all new. And frankly, I had no opportunity to bring it to committee, and then I had no opportunity to speak to the applicant before they tried for an appeal. So I want that on record to begin with. I missed that opportunity because it was literally at the time of the election, which is really disappointing. But also, in terms of the applicant now, if they wanted to come back with another application, you know, actually addressing some of these issues, how would that come about, and how can I be involved in that?
I don't know whether they can actually address the principal issue.
Okay.
I don't know whether they can actually address the principal issue because the location is what the location is, and the inspector has found that a new dwelling in that location is unacceptable. So I'm not sure how they would overcome that in principle objection.
Okay. Nothing else to add at this point, but I do want a conversation about that at a later date if I can.
I think, yeah, to clarify your own understanding of the sort of process and procedures. Yeah. Thank you.
Just as a general rule, if there's an appeal decision and somebody comes back in with a further application, if it is exactly the same, this won't be a good example. So if you've got an application that has just been refused and they've come back in with exactly the same, just making exactly the same arguments without changing anything, the authority has the ability to turn the application away for for a period of 2 years, because there was a situation where historically you can make an application, it gets refused, you lose an appeal. You make the same application again, you lose, you go to appeal, and it's almost trying to wear the authority down. So the Act was changed to allow authorities to refuse to accept an application for identical to an appeal within a 2 year period. It's not an automatic. We won't accept it. It's the discretion of the authority. So my stance has always been, if they've come back in with something that clearly addresses the reasons for refusal, so it's a slightly different scheme, then we would generally speaking accept it. It's not an automatic kicking out. But if the argument being put forward is identical to what the one an inspector has already dismissed, then the chances are we would refuse to accept it for a period of 2 years. I don't think that would be the case in this one, because why would you come back in with exactly the same argument that's already been rejected? That help, but happily to have a conversation. The next one is a single-storey extension at Walford Spine in Kingston. It was a delegated refusal on the basis of scale, size and design. The inspector dismissed it, and basically saying that the scale of the extension alone means that it appears an unsympathetic addition to the appeal building. So from the plans, why isn't that moved on? That was the proposed extension to what appears to be a traditional barn. I'm not surprised that was dismissed at appeal, to be perfectly honest. Happy for me to move on? Okay. The next one is the former Guthrie Reservoir at Dartmouth. There has been a previous application approval for 6 dwellings. The application was for 7. Officers refused the application on the basis of fundamentally we thought they were squeezing too much in. I think it's probably the best way of putting it. That's the site. That's what it is now. Oh, that's the proposal. It was allowed, and the inspector considered that the 7th dwelling would not result in additional harm. It still appeared as well designed. It wouldn't harm the living conditions, and planning obligations not justified given their impact on viability. I don't think I've got strong views on this one. Either way, I think it's very much just a subjective view from the.
Can I just ask about that last? I don't need this on, do I? I do need to. It's quite interesting this point that you don't need gardens because you live in countryside. What are your feelings about that? I haven't seen that as a part of an appeal before. I mean, the countryside doesn't necessarily belong to you. You don't necessarily have access to it. It's a bit of a strange comment, I would have thought.
I think that one of the key reasons that was put forward was that the garden sizes were insufficient and didn't meet the standards we would accept. I have seen it before, not very often, where in urban locations, if you've got a property that's immediately next to a public park, for argument's sake, I've seen the inspectors take the view that, well, it's acceptable to have garden sizes slightly smaller because there's an amenity immediately next door that you can use. This is the first time I've seen it, or the first time I can recall seeing it in a wider, where you live in the countryside, therefore you don't need a garden. I personally don't necessarily agree, and I think we should be striving to have sufficient space immediately next to the property.
How does that work within sort of biodiversity gain as well? If the gardens have been decreased in size, am I supposed to be looking at increasing biodiversity net gain. But I mean, I suppose this was all came through before that policy came through.
Yeah, very much so. And I think the advice we're getting from the ecologists at Devon County is that the vast majority of schemes of this size is more than likely to be off-site contributions because you just won't get it at that scale.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you. Just wondering, is this recommendation on size of gardens a national policy, or is this something in our local plan, or both, perhaps? Thank you.
To the best of my recollection, the only national space standards are to do with room sizes and bedroom sizes in particular. But as part of the supplementary planning document with the joint local plan, we have recommendations on minimum garden sizes. So it's a local policy, not necessarily a national policy.
Councillor Abbott.
Thank you. On the previous slide, please. There was a slide with text on. Maybe it's another one or two back then. Thank you. So, concern that the draft S106 agreement would not address education and open space obligations. Education then is not addressed by the inspector.
The inspector took the view that because of viability, it was not acceptable to go after the further single dwelling.
Councillor Rake.
So I think this is the flip side of my earlier question, is that, I mean, I think the garden size issue is absolutely bonkers. I think there's a huge difference between private open space and, sorry, I'm maybe not allowed to call an inspector bonkers in a public meeting, but does the fact that I mean, because the whole of the South Hams, you're relatively near countryside, does the fact that the inspector has made this decision mean that we have to, well, constrain our application of minimum garden sizes when dealing with future applications?
This is a single appeal decision. I don't believe that is significant enough for us to change our policy. So we will be continuing to impose and deal with applications on a basis with our adopted policy. If there is one or two more appeal decisions, so it's more than just a single inspector decision, then we might have to think about it. But I don't believe authorities should change their stance on policy based on a single appeal decision.
Councillor Allen.
Can I ask about the viability issue again? I know it comes up all the time, but was this land that been allocated in the local plan, or was this speculative development? This particular.
I don't believe it's allocated given the size of it, but I do believe, my recollection, this is historically this is where there was a Southwest Water Reservoir, and it's immediately adjacent to the Dartmouth built up area of Dartmouth. So whether it was allocated or not, it would have been a suitable site for development because it clearly would have been previously developed lands with a reservoir on it. So the principle of development of the site would never have been an issue for us. I'm afraid I haven't gone into this appeal decision into the detail to be able to talk about the viability or what was being proposed or not being proposed.
Councillor Don.
Yeah, thank you. Well, just turning Simon's question around the other way, rather than shouldn't we listen to the inspector? My question more is, why didn't the inspector listen to us? I mean, if we have a policy and we're mandating or recommending certain garden sizes, were there overarching factors that means that the inspector didn't take any notice, or is there any way of strengthening our policy so that it becomes more pertinent and enforceable?
Again, I don't think I'd be overly concerned about the strength of a policy or guidance based on one appeal one appeal decision. We've had a number of others where the policy on garden sizes has been supported. Unless there is something clear and specific in the appeal decision letter, it's always very difficult to try and, or sometimes it's quite difficult to try and work out the logic of how an inspector got to a particular decision. But as I say, I wouldn't get overly excised over one individual appeal decision.
Thank you, Mr. Weimer. Can we move on?
Members will remember this one. This is 1-0 to the committee, isn't it? Because my recollection is the officer recommendation was for approval of this one. So I won't go in much detail because you will remember this one what it was, because it was down the lengthy steps with the building construction site next door. So it's there. That's what it was. And the inspector concluded that it would have an adverse impact on the character and appearance of the area. So agreed with the committee. I'll move on.
Move on. We're not going to be smug or anything.
No. But it's one of those that I think was always a bit of a 50-50 decision, and I think I've got no issues with the inspector decision at all.
Nor have we.
Atlantic Lodge at Hope Cove, it's a replacement dwelling. Our main issue was the level of glazing and the impact on the undeveloped coast. So that's the proposal. What I do need to point out at this point is this came in before we made the change, before we adopted the changes to replacement dwellings and taking embodied carbon into effect. So that so that was the proposal. The inspectors saw the main issues as the effect on the character and appearance, and overall concluded that the proposed replacement dwelling would be of a quality design and finish that, together with the associated landscaping, would be an enhancement to the appeal site over and above the existing bungalow.
In terms of subjectivity, it does seem a little strange. So one inspector thought that a small replacement for a boathouse would have an adverse effect, and yet this whopping great thing would have there seems to be, where's the code of practice? How are they making these decisions?
I think it's really difficult to compare those two sites, mind, because that, whilst it was a small boathouse, it is really quite a prominent location on the estuary, next to a public footpath. So you can have situations where small developments do have almost a greater impact than larger ones, depending on context and site. This is, unfortunately, I haven't got a site plan for this one. This is, sorry, I had to do. This is a replacement dwelling, but Chair, I think I might say it's within the built-up area of.
It's within the built-up area of Hope Cove, so there are other buildings around. I think if you can't compare the two, as Pat has said. If you read the report for the boathouse, the inspector was quite clear on the sort of cumulative impact through the area. This is just looking specifically at this in a sort of almost an urban setting.
So it did replace a bungalow. Am I right in thinking that the same dark skies neighbourhood planning policy would apply to here as did the last application? Yeah. So just a word of caution, if we're going down the line of roof lights having an adverse impact on dark skies, just look at the level of glazing that an inspector allowed here when we were actually saying this level of glazing is going to cause a problem. I think my feeling is that things have to be, I think the 50-50 marginal ones where you used to get appeals dismissed, my feeling is they're starting to be allowed. There seems to be more household appeals being allowed now than previously. It's something we need to monitor. So whilst I wouldn't advocate changing anything based on individual decisions, if we start to get a run of having lots of household appeals allowed, I think we then need to have a look at, okay, what are we being too harsh now compared to inspector decisions?
I think though this was one I agreed with the officers for the level of glazing.
Yeah. So. I think we would, if we get any more like this, we'll then have to consider that argument in certainly in the built up within the confines of the main villages and settlements. Perhaps we are going to have to think about whether we can sustain those arguments at appeal.
Thank you. That's it.
I think so.
So we've concluded the planning appeals update. Agenda item 8 is the update on the undetermined major applications, which is basically for noting, and as previously, if anybody has any specific points, that they should contact the officer directly. But if you have got anything that's pertinent, I know some people do come up with questions, I think to go to...
The only comment I've got is at the end, I know at the end of here we've put 2 non-material amendment applications on the list. They really shouldn't be there because they're not major applications. They are simply non-material amendments to those approvals.
Thank you. That therefore concludes our business. Councillor Nix. Right. Thank you. Okay. So we will. Councillor Oram.
Thanks, Chairman. Really sorry. Is there usually a list of appeals ongoing? I thought I saw that last time. Is that?
It's on the agenda pack.
Yeah.
The report, the list of appeals. I report on the ones that have got decisions.
Right.
There are ones in there have got start dates or notifications we've had.
They will be in.
I'll quite happily go through it with you in a second if you
want. Yeah, so I know there was an appeal last time we were here, and I can't see it on there now, so I'm wondering where it's gone. That's all.
Right. Oh, we don't. Okay. Sorry, we don't have a list of. We don't report on a list of all of them that we've got on the books. What we report on is either appeals that have been submitted since the last report, or appeals we've had decisions on since the last report. So this is an update of either newly submitted appeals or appeal decisions.
Thank you for that. Forgive my ignorance, Chairman.
No, it's not ignorance. It's a justified question. Thank you, everybody. I will now close the meeting.